So hey everyone, happy Friday. Sorry for the delay in getting this thing started. I had to wrangle with Odysee, which is never fun. But we'll get this thing going, roll the intro in just like a second. But in the meantime, happy to be joined by the one and only Starkerz here. Once again, it's funny, when I was setting this thing up, I had completely forgotten that I'd had you on before. I remember I wanted to. I just didn't know if this would be the first or like the second time. And so that's how mushy my brain's been. It's kind of funny how since I got back since Hive Fest at Croatia, when I had poor Wi-Fi, so I got a little bit behind on some work, and then I got some bad pneumonia, and it was out for a few weeks, or actually more than a month. It's caused a fog of all my time from then to now. So now I'm just like, did this happen? Did that happen? Oh, I don't know what's going on. So
Yeah.
could just be
I mean, that's a
aging.
testament. I think that's a testament to how close to the edge you're pushing things.
Yeah,
You really,
unfortunately.
if you've got a lot going on, which is good, in some ways it's good because it means that you're really involved in a lot of things and you're really pushing yourself on the edge of everything. And I fully appreciate what you're saying because I feel like I'm involved in a lot of things as well. And sometimes you're like, did that really happen? Did we do that?
Yeah.
But it's a testament to like filling your brain up with as much information as possible to be as hopefully as effective and influential as possible in what you're trying to do. So
Yeah. One thing I've learned to get better at in that short amount of time there, I haven't gotten good at it, but I've gotten better, is first of all, personal discipline with my time management. So the stuff that I could squish my work into smaller pieces of time, but also management and delegation, including using like AI tools and stuff. And yeah.
we talking about AI. The world's going crazy because we wrote a book about 2.5 years ago where we did 9.5 hours of dictation and video discussions, me and Dan,
Mm-hmm.
talking about the Hive takeover and why it succeeded and what the principles are behind why that happened, why that succeeded,
Mm-hmm.
um, or at least why the takeover attempt failed. And we came to a number of realizations in that chat, and we've been looking for an author to write it properly because I'm not much of a writer myself, and Dan isn't either. But we're big talkers, so we've really talked these ideas out and really got them to a succinct explanation of why these things work and why blockchain is so counterintuitive. Um, and there's a number of principles that we came up with in this book anyway. And so the
Mm-hmm.
last week, Dan's really got into AI. He's got himself a nice, powerful machine and a couple of really powerful subscriptions. And he's written a book just out of nowhere. And it's not ready yet, but I've been going through it today, and some of the stuff in it is amazing. It's like looking at a mirror, a reflection of yourself. It's like you feed in this 9.5 hours of data of talking,
Mm-hmm.
and it spits out this bloody book that's actually reasonable. So I just think it's so cool what's going to happen with
It's
AI and things like
absolutely
that.
crazy. And I have to say, I just tried out Grok 3, the X one, and it blew me away in some ways because, the lead Dash developer does a lot of AI tools to help as a coding kind of, sidekick and stuff. And he really likes the AI. I forget what AI model he uses, but there was a very particular, highly technical cryptographic question about basically the ability of quantum computing to reverse or not, or to be able to undo or not be able to undo the hiding properties of Peterson commitment based confidential transactions. And
Mm,
according
mm,
to this word salad of stuff, it was like, yeah, quantum computing can break it, but I knew that wasn't the case. But so then I ran it through Grok 3 and it came up with this basically a research paper talking about how the math works of the equation and this and that, and talking about the perfectly hiding things, how those properties work, and how there's no computational base, all this kind of stuff in a very impressive way to where it can actually almost think and reason in ways. It's getting to some. There's obviously all this dubious stuff. So far, it's still, but it's so useful now that now,
yeah,
like, the amount of work I see is just like this stack, throw
yeah,
that one away, and just you
yeah.
can have it auto listen to, just feed it all your 185 episodes. This is 185 right here of this live show, and just you can get it to say anything. Make a novel, make a book, make a this, make a that. It's crazy.
The cool thing, I think we have a similar thing with CTT. We're on 120 shows, and we don't do as much these days as we used to, but we still do it from time to time. And what we're starting to realize is if you take a transcript of all that data and then get AI to summarize it into a foundational text, and then from that foundational text, you can build things off it. You can build like a children's novel or an adult's novel or a academic paper, you know, and you can start, once you got your foundational text there that mirrors all your principles properly and where they come from, then you can really start doing all sorts of other products on top. And the thing is, to me, is like people say, oh, it's going to take people's jobs and stuff. Of course, there's an element of that, but also it's going to build so many more opportunities for people to do things that they couldn't do before, right? I'm sure you see things that you can do now that you wouldn't have been able to do prior, you know. So hopefully we'll be reading the Joel book at some point then.
Yeah, it seems like there's the same raw number of jobs, just everyone is a manager now, a manager of a bunch of little AI agents. And so here, and the thing is, it's funny that all this like freeing up time has some interesting, you know, side effects. Like, for example, I'm able to practice my latte making skills with my espresso machine over there. I'm able to have a fully wood heated house that I chop all my own wood for and everything. Able to cook everything from scratch, have a garden, have locally produced things, make our butter from scratch, make our pasta from scratch, make everything.
Nice.
And just like all this stuff that now the AI, like the knowledge that's out there with the internet makes it so easy. I don't have to spend a lifetime learning. It just shortcuts it. And then the time savings, and just, I feel like one of these days I'll have to have a big, long think about all the scary and negative implications of this, because so far I'm exposed to just the positive parts, and I'm loving the positive parts, and we'll see where it goes. All right, let me roll this intro thing, and then we jump into this. It's 25 minutes.
Well, we're going to talk about the DAO, right? We're going to talk about the DAO dramas and things like that. So it's I'm excited to talk about this.
All right, intro, 3, 2, 1, go. All right, so welcome everyone officially. Digital Cash Rundown, episode 185. Over 185 weeks in a row of doing this, with a couple of, you know, cancellations for Hive Fest and other travel. So probably like at least 200 weeks, mid 2020, I think. I'm joined by the illustrious Mr. Starkerz, also known as 3Speak TV on X. How's it going, man?
How you doing, Joel? It's good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you again too. And second time on the show. I thought it was the first, but then, you know, it just, everything blends together at some point. We have a bunch of fun stuff to talk about. I just thought it'd be great to talk to you generally. And then there's some interesting stuff that happened in the Hive ecosystem that, you know, you're a subject matter expert. And so, I figure I might as well, you know, dive into the stuff. So let me just do the shill real quick. For Coin ATM Radar, the fantastic folks who sponsor me. This podcast is very much indeed sponsored by Coin ATM Radar. When buying crypto with cash, an ATM is much more reliable and safer than meeting some random person in a random place. And unlike an exchange, which could freeze your account, which, you know, not your keys, not your coins, remember, you truly own all the crypto you buy. With Coin ATM Radar, you can find crypto ATMs and other services where you could buy or sell cryptocurrencies for cash. On their website, you can search by coin, address, if the ATM supports selling as well as buying. And selling, of course, is great for someone like me who does not have fiat otherwise. And you can also search by geo area, like country, state, and city. Like when I searched what was the closest one to Split, Croatia for Hive Fest, and I found that the Mall of Split, they had a shitcoins.club ATM. And I was able to sell a little bit for euros to use during Hive Fest. So that was fun. And so you can also check and compare actual current fees at different ATMs. To find out more, go to coinatmradar.com, which is coinatmradar.com. Whew, there we go. Let's hit on this roster.
By the way, I just wanted to ask on that ATM, do you know, will it present you with a Lightning invoice that you can scan to pay and then get cash out? Are you familiar if that can happen?
You mean, are you talking about buying or selling from the ATM?
So if you're selling crypto to get cash out, and you go there
I
and scan a Lightning invoice, does it present you with a Lightning invoice on the screen? You scan it, and then it gives you Bitcoin.
Let me actually check that.
Sorry, it gives you cash, I should say.
Let me check that out actually, because some do. I'm sure some definitely do. Let me actually just check this exact ATM. See
Well,
if they
while
have.
you're checking, the reason I'm asking is because Brian in London's built V for V app, where you can take currency and scan it, and it pays a Lightning invoice on your behalf from that other currency. So it means you've got
Yeah,
potential access to a lot more cashing out capabilities with different cryptos than just only Lightning to Lightning.
yeah. I'm not 100% sure, but I will check that out. Depends on. I know some of these ATMs. So Coin ATM Radar is just an aggregator of all these different ATMs. My favorite ones are the shitcoins.club ones because I love the name. They're also a big Bitcoin logo shaped machine. So they're super easy to find.
Okay.
They support Dash, which not all ATMs do. And they support no KYC or other identifying info for lower amounts. And they've been very consistent on this. And so and the selling as well. So not all ATMs let you sell. Some just let you buy. So like all in all, it's just I know exactly what I'm getting from those ATMs. Always look for that. But so I don't know if they in particular support Lightning, but plenty of ATMs do. But so I already know where the brain's coming. Anyone can turn Hive dollars into paper dollars.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you can earn the Hive dollars from blogging, which hopefully
Yeah.
if you put this podcast on Hive, you'll be able to earn.
Yeah, absolutely. It is on right now. I have a threadcast going.
Yes.
It's a Inleo post that lets people on, I guess anyone with the link can just use it. It's not like it's a Inleo specific one. Anyone on Hive can do that. I tagged you in it, I believe, too. But anyway, yeah. So just the live chat.
I'll be voting that during the show. I'll be giving some
Nice.
votes out during the show to anyone else interacting, and hopefully we can distribute some crypto
Yeah.
to people taking part.
So anyone watching, look at my profile, the Desert Linux on Hive, and then somewhere in one of the top comments will be the threadcast where it talks about this stuff. So just that's an easy way to find it, I guess. It is always fun because every system has different compatibility things as far as like how things are indexed. And I personally really like the global universal blockchain aspect of things to where I can like pull my like plug in the username. I like block explorers and stuff. And so I like being able to take things out of one interface and look at them in a different one. It's cool, like that universal data thing. So whenever people with ECNC, people with PeakD, etc., can be commenting on this thing too, which I think is cool. That it's not just, oh, if you're one of them in Leo users, you can use it. It's like, nope, everyone can. So before we get too far into other stuff, I want to hit on the Ross Ulbricht thing because it's not, not a lot to say on that other than, so Ross Ulbricht, the famous, infamous, whatever, founder of the Silk Road, who famously got pardoned by President Trump first day or two in office, which is a campaign promise. I was 50-50 if he was going to do this, and he did. And so now Roger Ver, good friend of mine, great crypto pioneer, is facing like 108 years in prison for allegedly not paying his exit tax enough of his exit tax when he left to not become a U.S. citizen anymore. And he's, the IRS will not tell him what he owes or let him settle. So let's hope that this stops. And it's good that Ross is returning the favor that Roger gave him, advocating for his release as well. So that's just the quick summary on that. Do you have any thoughts specifically?
Well, I mean, obviously a controversial figure in crypto, and whether he did what he did or not, morally is up for debate. But it's pushing the edge of new tech. It's opening new markets, and that's always going to have some controversy in some way, shape, or form. the thing that I think is most interesting about his story is, we spent this whole time feeling sorry for him and be like, oh, the guy's locked in jail, because you think that could be me. It could easily be you. Like, we're all in this area of gray area of pushing the tech forwards. And at some point you may end up treading on someone's toes that you shouldn't have, or the government, and you may end up in prison like Ross. But what an ultimate hodl strategy. The ultimate hodl strategy. Because while I was free out here, I was buying and selling Bitcoin and making stupid mistakes. While he was forced to hodl through the whole thing. And what a great strategy coming out of, I think is it over $100 million he's worth right now?
Yeah, although I'm pretty sure he didn't have any when he went in. Like, I'm pretty sure everyone just got it all confiscated and stolen.
From donations.
Yeah, so
yeah, well, I was thinking that, yeah.
As soon as he got out, people gave him several $100,000 worth of crypto, which maybe I should go to prison more often, I mean, that's obviously.
I don't want to wish that on anyone.
That's a flippant comment. Obviously, I don't actually wish that, especially the solitary kind of confinement that he had for 11 years was just unimaginable and brutal, and I would not wish that on anyone. But it's a funny comment to make that, hey, maybe I should become a cause célèbre, martyr, or whatever, and then just get a bunch of money from that. But, at the same time, I value my freedom more.
Sure. I mean, it's irreplaceable, right? It makes you wonder. It makes you realize that even if you got $100 million for staying in prison for 11 years, would you exchange it? Would you exchange the time? I don't think so. I think Ross would also agree with that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One thing that's interesting is the entire crypto world sort of united around Ross Ulbricht, and it became very, his cause became very popular and championed in crypto and in liberty circles, and then in some conservative politics circles. But it's kind of funny how that worked out. And even a lot of people who shared none of his values, like the modern Bitcoin maximalists, were really advocating for his release. And then Roger Ver is a similar kind of a figure, except he's been out and active the whole time. And through his conviction, has burned a lot of bridges with those kinds of people. And they do not believe in like freedom and innocence and all this kind of stuff. They absolutely do not. And the only reason they advocated for Ross, in my opinion, is because Ross is frozen in time as a historical figure that they were programmed to like. And now that, even though they didn't come back and reevaluate, well, okay, wait, I believe in the drug war. I believe in, law and order. I believe in all these things that attacked him. Why would I defend him? They didn't go back to think about that. But since Roger Ver has been out and kicking the whole time, he's given them plenty of opportunities to reevaluate what they think about him.
Yeah.
And because they have no principles or conviction, in my humble opinion, now it's just like, this guy sucks. And every single one of these things, even from their hero, Ross, who they advocated so hard to get out of prison, when he's standing up for Roger, they're all, throw him in jail, all these comments. It's really weird.
Something here is crazy. There's something crazy going on here, because I was just in El Salvador for Plan B, right? The biggest Bitcoin Maxi conference kind of thing, loads of Bitcoin Maxis there. Adam Back was there. Samson Mao, all these types, and I'm standing next to them, and I didn't speak to them that much, but there's people that I know that speak to them a lot, and I'm tight with all these people, I know some of these people, and having spoken to a couple of them during this conference, I'm obviously very respectful, because it's a Bitcoin maximalist conference, and I'm not a Bitcoin maxi, and I believe that Bitcoin works better when it's combined with other technologies, and I think that that's what's actually going to solve the digital human rights issue, not Bitcoin on its own. Although I think Bitcoin is a very big part of it, of course. But then you look at, talking to these people, they're nice people. You go speak to them over a coffee or in the bars and stuff over there at these conferences. They don't talk about Bitcoin, but just talk about daily stuff. And they're nice people, like they're normal people, and they want freedom. We're all firmly rooted. Let's get back to what we're all here for. We're all firmly rooted in the idea that we want to have freedom. Along the way, we've been sidetracked into shitcoins and scams and people losing loads of money and ICOs and centralized companies releasing blockchains and all these types of things where, we've compromised. There's been a lot of compromise from the original vision. Mm-hmm. But then at the same time, you look at the top maxis at the moment, and they're also into alternative coins. None of them will tell you. They don't speak about it much at the conference, but they'll say, I hold a bit of this token on the side, or they'll actually be actively working in projects that are also what a Bitcoin maxi would term as a shitcoin or an altcoin. And so then you kind of look at it and go, well, they're actually nice people. And I think there's a lot of autism involved. And I think on the internet, the thing
Really?
that really
That's an
annoyed me recently
understatement.
was,
But
I mean,
sure.
yeah, it's extreme autism, but the which in many ways is a good thing. Don't get me wrong, but some of the comments that were made recently about Roger should be locked up. Roger should be locked up. Good. He's being pursued by. You're just like, guys, like, okay, you have fundamental ideological disagreements with this person, but we all know we're all in this to try and win some sort of freedom. Now, maybe you could argue some of the Bitcoin maximalism that's happened is actually demonstrably anti-freedom, but I think deep down we're all bloody nice. Most people are decent people that are trying to do something, and I think we need to come back to this place of like realizing, look, Roger may disagree with you on this sort of fundamental level, but there's no reason to wish him to go to prison. And we're all trying to do something here because why? We all have this fundamental enemy, which is anti-freedom. I don't think there's a specific person or group of people. It's just that there's a movement that is anti-Western civilization, anti-freedom, and we have the tools to bring freedom about. Now, how we go about doing that, we've all got our different ways of going about doing it. But let's not let this type of thing divide us, please. We should all
Yeah.
be rooting together because we do have a much bigger enemy than Roger Ver if you think that he's your enemy, right? The enemy that's facing us is an absolute monster, and it's been putting this plan together to remove our freedoms for hundreds of years at this point. And so wake up, guys. We all got to get back together and work in the same direction, even if we slightly disagree with each other on how we're going to get there.
Yeah, I definitely, of course, agree. One thing I think is interesting, it's taken me a while. Again, life is nothing but a learning experience. And it sounds like such a stupid, like, aphorism to just it sounds like but it's true. And one thing I realized, there are these things that are programmed in the human DNA which are not very useful today, maybe, but were emergency defense mechanisms for millennia as the species was trying to survive. And one of these things, if you notice, is like with sports fandom, where people get really crazy over which team they like, and they start, you guys are all wankers, whatever. You get a lot of this kind of, hooliganism going on. It does not make any logical sense. And you get nice people, as you mentioned, nice people that get into this weird war mode, this tribal war thing that they're tapped into. And so these people, if they sat down and had a good conversation with Roger, for example, would get along just great. But I don't know about that.
They get along great.
They'd be like, I don't know about that. Maybe they may disagree, but now they're literally calling for his blood. And face to face, they don't. That's not.
You wouldn't do that face to face.
That's what I'm saying.
Violence, right?
I think it is disgusting, and there's a little bit of. I am giving him like a 20% pass on that though, because I understand that that's their weird chimpanzee human nature, that they don't understand what they're doing. Really, they're just acting in a tribal way.
It's the tribalistic autism that comes out on the internet that you would never get in real life. And that's what I'm trying to say ultimately. In these conferences, meeting these people, they're lovely people. Okay. Ideologically, I don't align with them fully. But I certainly, in real life, they definitely wouldn't be threatening and saying this guy should go to prison, right? There's just a threat of immediate violence, and online you don't have that. And I think people's tensions get high, and they say things online that maybe they didn't mean. I mean, I'm sure they mean it, but if you were to get into a real conversation, if I was to put Roger Ver there in front of those guys and say, hey, talk to each other, they wouldn't be like falling for each other to go to prison, right? It just wouldn't. They'd realize how much they have in common.
Yes.
I was
just registering the Hive username Tribal Autist. Oh, just kidding.
But by the way, talking about Hive, we're here on the Leo thread. I've got Green Master Joel, Just Call Me Sly, Solimi, all commenting. I'm voting for them with my stake and sending rewards out. This is the easiest way to earn crypto. Yes. During a live stream, just come comment and you can earn crypto rewards as people vote for you for asking interesting questions. I'd like to just ask something that you may have a better insight than me, Joel. Just Call Me Sly says, any chances Ross might continue the legacy of Roger Ver's work in any way, shape or form, if not released, or who might?
Yeah.
Do you know if they align? Do you know if Ross and Roger align?
I think so. Well, they were 100% aligned at the Silk Road time. And obviously things have shifted since then. Who knows if Ross's ideas got kind of frozen also during his sentences, and he just still thinks, in which case he'd be very aligned with Roger today. I know he's a friend of Roger. He's friendly towards him because they've advocated a lot for each other's causes and raised money. I'm sure Roger's donated at least six figures. I mean, I'm just guessing, but I'm sure, knowing him and the kind of man he is, he's donated a lot of money to Ross's freedom. So I think they are aligned. Now, the thing I don't understand. So when Ross was asking for clemency, he did talk a lot about how he thought he made some dumb mistakes, and he's very sad for them. And I don't know how much of that is like begging for clemency, and how much of that is like he actually thought he behaved in a maybe reckless or immature way in the way he started the Silk Road stuff. I'd have to actually talk to him and see what he thinks. So there's a possibility they diverged a little bit, but at the same time, Ross, within the last couple of years, published some like DAO mock-up papers from prison that he was just thinking about, like decentralized marketplace, not just marketplace, but like he's thinking about decentralized structures and he was continuing to think about the kind of stuff he was thinking about before he went in. And it sounds like they're a lot on similar ideologies. But as far as continuing Roger's work, Roger is not really a tech guy. He's a businessman and an evangelist. Those are the two things he is. Yeah. You could argue that Ross is also a bit of a businessman because of the Silk Road and stuff, although you could argue he wasn't at the same time. He's not a little bit of an evangelist, but he's much less of that. I think a tech and visionary is kind of more Ross's domain, if I were to guess. Like, especially now he's out, he could start thinking more about DAOs and structures, and maybe like what Amir Taki is working on with like DarkFi and stuff like that. Maybe that's all like the stuff where he wanted to contribute to. Maybe he just doesn't want any of that. I don't know, but it is exciting to have one of the best. It's almost like Satoshi coming back to a certain extent, in that there's this like
at least a little bit of that coming back from the past, right?
Yes, and some of it is like the old school vibe coming back, but a lot of it is also just a visionary of the early days. It doesn't matter if it's the early days or not. Just any kind of visionary in the space is good.
Sure. And this is it, again, coming back to the point I was just making. We're all trying to fight this anti-freedom beast that is moving very rapidly towards us, you know? I'm happy for multiple solutions to be out there. I don't think there's one. I think it's impossible to say there's one. You can't be pro-libertarian and say there's only one, right? You've got to be willing to have a marketplace of ideas and let people like Ross and Roger and support them even if you disagree with them with a small piece of the industry that you disagree with them in. We're all going towards the same direction, which is freedom, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, for sure. Well, just to wrap up the Maxi point, because then we got some fun DAO topics. I did a sort of cavalcade of posts of, now this is maybe when I'm talking about the animalistic tribal, the tribal autism type thing, maybe this is me being a little bit of decrying here, but it just,
you're guilty of it too. We're all guilty of it,
maybe
right?
It's all in good fun. So this person called Plan B, who's a big, he apparently came up with this stock to flow idea of Bitcoin, whatever, some big influencer type person. He says, disclosure, I've transferred my Bitcoin to ETFs. Yes, I know, not your keys, not your coins, but it is just easier for me to manage Bitcoin the same way as equities and bonds. Also, not having to hassle with keys gives me peace of mind. I guess I'm not a maxi anymore. So I have to say, there's a lot of reasonable points made in that post from the normie perspective, I guess. From the principled perspective, it's complete eye bleach or something. So, but yeah, it's funny where you have Peter Schiff, our good old friend, roasting him in the comments. It
wouldn't be the same without him. It wouldn't be the same.
Yeah, I have, before I got into crypto, I did briefly do some work for him, some contracting for his newsletter and stuff, and
all right.
He's a good dude. A lot of people know him, but again, he's the other side of that thing. It's funny, he's sounding And Peter Schiff's comment here was just another example of Bitcoin not fulfilling its supposed purpose. It's nothing more than a digital pyramid scheme, now resorting to political influence to force taxpayers into keeping the scam going. Which is, it's a little harsh, but it's funny how Peter Schiff sounds like the bigger cypherpunk in some ways, which is like...
Well, I was just thinking the same thing, because if he really wanted to resonate, right,
Yeah.
he would attack Bitcoin in the same way that you and I have done.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying attacking it. I'm just critical. I'm critical of what I'm observing. I'm
Mm-hmm.
observing a high fee base layer that only the elite can afford the fees on, right? I'm observing a chain that can't really do social interactions, but can do very slow, over-engineered liquidity provision, which is great, but it's a neutral liquidity layer for everyone. But you have to be able to afford the fee if you want things like free speech. That's the angle that Schiff should take, because that would resonate with far more people. Well, he's still kind of caught in this old world argument. And it's like, no, there's other ways to critique. Basically, Schiff should come and read your blog and then figure out, hold on a minute, I can change my angle, and it's a much more appealing way to critique Bitcoin, and maybe would even improve it over time.
Well, that's the thing. He's sort of given random lip service to, well, blockchain technology could be useful, but for tokenized gold, but everything else is a scam. He's like 70% right in his post, kind of like I want to work on him is my point. But
you got to work on him. Yeah. You got to create an AI version of Peter Schiff with all of those mistakes fixed.
But we have to admit, so not everyone knows that his father was kind of like the analog Ross Ulbricht, who wrote some books about called The Federal Mafia, about why U.S. citizens are not obligated legally to pay income taxes and things like that. It was one of the only books ever banned for sale in the U.S. We're talking about banned books. It was not banned for publication, but they banned the sale because they consider it to be fraudulent / a scam. Therefore, you shouldn't profit off it. That was the loophole they used to do it. He died in prison. He went to prison and he was there for many decades and he died, which is about it's very tragic. It's also hardcore. It's like very cypherpunk. So Peter Schiff is just like... He's just like the analog cypherpunk, not the digital one. So it's just, he's one of us, kind of.
You know, this is something else that's interesting that's going on in the space right now. With Trump releasing his 80% pre-mined shitcoin, which is just blows all of the regulations out the water now. You know, like, what is going on? It's
a world of possibilities.
So you talk about, people like Peter Schiff's father going to prison for writing that stuff. And then yet here's Trump releasing one of the biggest pre-mined cryptos in history. I mean, what do you do? Imagine that on day one of the presidency. I mean, I honestly didn't expect it. Our general rule is, if you want a truly neutral layer that gives people digital rights, no insiders pre-mine, pre-coin release, right? No freaking one giving themselves 80% of the supply. Even to me, as an extreme ideologue, no, not even 1%, because what happens is you misalign your incentives with the community. Like, you got to come, if you give yourself 0% on day one and then you go and earn the token or buy it off the open market, you're actively adding value before you cash out, right? Whereas Trump's pre-mine is not adding any value. The people that get the token, those 80% insiders, they didn't add a single cent of value before they get to cash out. So their interests are directly misaligned with the community members who are buying that token. I mean, at some point, this message needs to get out so people realize that there are people that have done zero work who are going to be dumping on you that get value for not doing anything, and they're using you to exit, and you're adding value by buying from them. It's just an unfair exchange,
Yeah, it is funny, like, all the time. Like, I wonder if anyone's going to ask, what's the Hive vesting period or something? Like, I get emails all the time of people asking to do some large OTC deals with, like, the Dash founding team or whatever. And like, you think we have the coin? No, it's just out there. There's no team that has this hoard. And they're like, oh, okay. Like it's so normalized to have it that way. And I have to give a shout out to the Maya protocol, because I haven't thought super deeply, like, on what is the fairest possible launch or whatever possible, but they're definitely one of the up there, because the Maya liquidity auction, all the coins got created at once, and basically for several months ahead of time, they say, we're going to do this. You're going to provide your part of the two-sided liquidity pools of Bitcoin, Ethereum, whatever else, Rune. Just put it there, and at the end of the auction period, you'll get the matching percentage of Cacao, the native token, and then you can do whatever you want with it. And the longer if you hold longer, you don't just like get the airdrop and run. If you hold longer and just continue to seed liquidity into those pools, then you'll get other special tokens over a period of time. Yeah. And surprisingly, even though it got very well distributed to just people right in the beginning, almost no one sold right away or within the first few months. It was like people just got into the project and just stayed. And it's kind of cool.
Yeah. That's a really nice way to distribute a token. I mean, if you're providing value, and the beauty of it is, and this is something we talk a lot about, how do you figure out ways that normal people can provide value and mine tokens without having to run technical infrastructure, right? So that's one way: provide liquidity, receive some rewards in return over time. And as long as their team, I don't know enough about Maya to comment much, but maybe you do. As long as their team didn't give themselves anything on day one, and they also staked liquidity like everyone else did, and that's really a fair launch. Yeah,
basically. One thing I do know about them too, first of all, they're not US based, which is always, it's always helpful for staying outside of the SEC and all that kind of stuff. But also, I do know that they are legit in that they're all anons. I've met them in person, so they are real people, but only the founder's face is publicly kind of shown. And I know that they don't have like corporate entities or bank accounts or any of that stuff based on like the work I've actually done with them. So they are actually on chain only, kind of, just like raw, like Satoshi intended, I guess, it's always nice.
Talking about proof of person, there's a few things I want to get into a bit later on, maybe in this call, that we've got a mechanism for proof of person already that I think is really interesting. And I think it's the first proof of person model working that I've seen where no KYC is required and you don't need to know someone to prove that you're a person. But we can go into it a little bit later, maybe.
Yeah, well, let me, no pun intended, but lightning round the dumping on Maxi's portion of this just to get through it, because that's just what I do as a sport on X, and there's nothing, we don't need to like rehash it so much. But this Arthur Van Pelt fellow, he's famously commented, he says, if self-custody is important to Satoshi, he would have coded it up in Bitcoin, but he didn't. Ask yourself why. And that's one of those things where it's like in the Pirates of the Caribbean when they tip the ship upside down, they capsize it, and then it just is right side up on the other side of the world. It's one of those things where it's so dumb that it leaves you sort of speechless because
it's the attention mining almost,
Yes, attention mining. It might, and I would actually argue that this individual probably is playing like a complex devil's advocate kind of thing for exactly that purpose. He knows how ridiculous it sounds, but is saying it anyway. But the funny thing about that is just self-custody is literally all Bitcoin is a self-custody system, a self-custody and sending that self-custody to other people who self-custody. Now, do you self-custody your own self-custody, or do you let it to someone else? That's something the protocol cannot force or enforce. It's impossible, but it is by definition a permissionless system, which is a structure at least, which is a self-custody system. So it's kind of wrong. I would say 90+% wrong on that. But the little 10% weirdness is like, well, it doesn't define who custodies or not because it has no technical ability to while remaining decentralized.
One of my concerns here about this whole movement against self-custody is that what you're going to end up with is large pools of Bitcoin in the accounts of a small number of centralized regulatable entities. And I think the more that happens, the more close you are to a situation where they all collude and turn around and say, oh, something just happened to Bitcoin, we had to fork, and this is now the new Bitcoin, and we only recognize these coins on our exchanges or on our ETF accounts. And other fork,
like BlackRock, remember when BlackRock says we reserve the right to decide which fork of Bitcoin in the event of a fork, and it does not necessarily have to be the one with the higher market cap. And it's just like, they're thinking ahead there.
They're thinking about it. You can see it coming through in the documentation, and it's very clear where this is going. The other thing as well is, while I was at this Plan B conference, and I like the guy that did it personally, but I'm looking at it going, Plan B, it's not actually Plan B. That it's a clever marketing gimmick because Plan B, it's not the guy that you mentioned earlier. It's just called Plan B because it's one of the people Plan Bitcoin, right? It's like, so it's actually a Bitfinex sponsored event, right? And then Bitfinex have come with the USDT on Lightning, which is in itself a centralized central bank asset backed. Well, not central bank, but it's a
Well,
banking
if
asset
only it was
backed
banking.
stablecoin.
If only if it was bank backed, that's one of the criticisms. It is not even, but yes.
It's not even.
Yeah.
So then it's got this element of censorship to it because that could all be confiscated. And then you've got this ability now to wrap it and put it on Lightning, right? And it's like, and you've got this event called Plan B where everyone's giving a round of applause to the speech of the person that's presenting this technology, and it's just not, in my opinion, not a good look. It's not a good look at all. It's ironic in its grandeur, like it's like this event called Plan B where people are putting a centralized, in my opinion, it's not centralized in the classic sense, but it's definitely got banking assets backing it. So it's a centralized stablecoin as far as I'm concerned, and it's now wrapping on Lightning. And now Bitcoin maxis and Bitcoiners around this conference have basically been, I wouldn't say them being directly paid, but the conference is sponsoring this event, and people saying, "Oh yeah, we like this idea of using USDT on Lightning." It's like, where are we going? What the hell? And that's meshing the two together. So you've got maxis who are Bitcoin maxis using USDT, which is the opposite of what a maxi should be using, to as their liquidity to exit into stable coins for Bitcoin, being wrapped on the Lightning Network, being presented at a conference called Plan B, sponsored by Bitfinex. It just smells strange, man. It's not a good.
And it's really funny about that entire situation is it's all back to that chimpanzee tribalism because like the max it's funny because which are the services the maxis like? The maxis like Trezor, even though Trezor supports shitcoins according to them, but they're fine. They're the cool one. Ledger is the bad one. They support too many shitcoins, maybe. I don't know. Then it's like, well, Tether, they love Tether because it's part of their whole thing, I guess. But USDC is bad. Bitfinex and like Swan Bitcoin or whatever is good. Coinbase is bad. And they hate Coinbase so much. And these are parallel services. There's no moral difference between them, except honestly, the Maxi ones are usually a little bit more sketchy from a business perspective, if I were to be honest. Yeah. But they're kind of the same thing. Like Tether and USDC, Tether's just a little bit more of a wild boy USDC, but it's the same thing.
It's the same thing.
But this one's good and that one's not good, and it's very strange.
And on the flip side, the US banking system has seen now USDT can be the mechanism through which we spread the dollar worldwide, which in some ways, I kind of like the idea of a worldwide dollar, like being really powerful. I get it. I get why they're trying to do that. And I'd rather that than some other fiat currency. It certainly allows algorithmic stablecoins pegged to the dollar to flourish more successfully by piggybacking off that. But you can see the US government's figured it out. We're going to pump the world full of USDT, right? And that's how we're going to spread the dollar everywhere. It's like, I can see it's just like a slow motion train wreck. People are just walking straight into this. It's so obvious the play, but like they don't want an algo-backed stablecoin or a non-banking asset-backed stablecoin that's truly decentralized in doing this. They want Tether doing it. Of course they do.
Yeah, of course.
And talking about maxis, I mean, I've got a lot of respect for some of these guys. Don't get me wrong, like I really do. There's some really smart guys up there, but the ideology is also crippling. So, and you'll get scenarios where Liquid, for example, and I've got a lot of respect for the Liquid project, but it is ultimately a preordained system where I think it's 12 validators run the ecosystem, and they're kind of pre-selected. Yeah. But it's a privacy coin on top of Bitcoin. But then it's like, well, hold on a minute. All the top maxis support it, but aren't you supposed to be maxis? Wasn't there supposed to be, why are you using an altcoin on Bitcoin when you were supposed to be a maxi? It just doesn't make any sense.
I actually made an interesting point in like some of these people like Cashew and Fediment stuff, which is again fully custodial stuff. It's not just Lightning, but I'm using the custodial wallet because it's easier. It's just like, no, this thing is in the root custodial and ruggable, and so it is interesting it goes back to the tribalism thing, because there are some avenues which are acceptable and some which are not. And as I mentioned, I wrote this article about avoiding the Bitcoin death spiral, which I believe it's got to be on Hive as well, based on when I wrote it. Yeah. But the basically talking about, the problems facing the BTC chain and the solutions. And basically the solution that I said would be most likely would be enough decentralized protocols would have a decentralized wrapped version of Bitcoin that would sustain it and kind of make things work. And basically I said discard all sanctioned L2s, because all the stuff that the maxis like, whether it's, Lightning, no, whether it's stacks, and a lot of maxis don't like stacks, but or rootstock, or just there's a bunch of these. I can't even keep up with like all the different, because we could bit VM, whatever, a bunch of these things, they're just not going to make it, to be honest. Just I don't believe that they're going to make it and succeed long term. But the outside of Bitcoin ecosystem, finding a way to trustlessly tokenize Bitcoin is something I have a lot more. And again, the maxis won't like any of these things, but everyone else will. And so if they like Bitcoin,
there's a whole. This is a good point. You look at like VSC coming out on Hive in the next few weeks, and then the Bitcoin wrapped, the wrapped Bitcoin side of it will be sometime in June or July, as far as I understand at the moment. That is a way to wrap Bitcoin onto Hive and transact it with zero fees instantly, right? So, that's the Lightning Network. And everyone has to process all the transactions, so you can't just block people's transactions like you can on the Lightning Network. So it's like solutions like that go hand in. This is what I'm trying to say, and I think you'd be in agreement. Bitcoin is great as it stands. It's not what we originally thought it was going to be, but it's good. But combined with these layer 2 solutions that are genuinely decentralized and don't have a central weak point of failure, and give people the neutral chains, side chains, so that they give people human rights to transact in Bitcoin. And if you can get zero fee transactions going on Bitcoin, or really low fee transactions, an instant on a side system, that makes Bitcoin viable as cash again. So I think that type of direction is where we should go to help Bitcoin and try and make it better than what it was. Or at least make it better than what it currently is.
And I kind of view helping Bitcoin as a secondary side effect. It's kind of a positive externality almost. It's more using the thing that Bitcoin has that other things don't. It just take the element. And the thing that other things don't is basically all cryptos have weird volatility problems that don't always work positively, pretty much. And the things that don't are the US dollar is very stable in a downward trajectory. It's going down, but it's going down very stably to where it's not a problem in day-to-day commerce and accounting.
Yes.
And Bitcoin does its thing, but tends to trend upwards more than a lot of other things over a long time frame. So if you just take those two pieces and put them onto whatever tech actually works, then you're safe.
Yes, exactly. And the other side of this as well is, the Bitcoin maximalism is rooted in this idea of asking people to invest in tokens, right? Buy my shitcoin, famous phrase, buy my shitcoin, right? Well, Bitcoin maxis say don't buy anyone else's shitcoin, buy Bitcoin, invest in Bitcoin, because that's where you can put your savings. It's a store of value. I think that's a fair argument because of the cap supply. It's probably going to go up in value over time. Who knows? But it seems like a sound investment model, at least to store your wealth. But there's other tokens there that can help Bitcoin. And they're not saying buy my shitcoin. They're saying earn it. Come do some work, earn it, and use it. Use it as a utility in your daily life and your daily spending as cash and things like this, right? So these tokens don't need to ask people to invest in them long term. They can just say, hey, come use it and earn some while you're using it, by the way. And how's that a scam? How's that a shitcoin? When you can say, well, take some of the earnings and put some of that in Bitcoin. If you really want to satisfy, these are all arguments that we can build against maximalism that prove that, the investment thesis in these other coins is utility over storage of value, right? And of course, there are some elements of storage of value in those, but you don't need to say to people, buy my shitcoin. You say, use the token, use the economy in your daily life. That's going to provide value to it inherently. And then it's a valuable system, and you never had to take any risk to do that. Okay,
Yeah.
maybe you had to buy $100 worth to spend the next day or whatever, right?
Hmm.
But you used it as a utility rather, and Bitcoin doesn't have that on its base layer. And this is where the argument comes, in my opinion, that it's very useful to help Bitcoin become more and it, like you say, it is a side effect of the base layer, base principles and products of those
Yeah.
what could become Bitcoin side chains, but it's inherently anti-maximalist, but it also defeats the maximalist argument in my point of view.
And I've been writing this article series. I wrote one called "Stop Hoarding Gas Tokens," which was one of my favorite ones, and I basically was breaking down token types, whether it's a gas token, whether it's an investment token, or whether it's a product token, and then basically encouraging people to apply those to chains that they have and think critically about which of those things are you actually buying, because a lot of people are under this, let's give the maxi credit for once, the shitcoiner mentality of buy my shitcoin, buy this random token. Yeah. And it's like, well, you're not supposed to just buy it. You're supposed to use it. This is a gas token. You're not supposed to just hoard the gas token. And they're, I got to buy it and just this kind of stuff. And I've been sort of exploring the investment thesis of a bunch of different cryptos according to this guide. I was intending to do Hive this week, but I ran out of time, so it'll probably be next week about breaking down all the different things. But yeah, can you imagine someone who just loves the idea of Hive, thinks it's amazing, and it's just like, you know what? I'm going to buy all the HBD I can. It's like, okay, and then what? I don't know. I'll do well. No, you won't. You'll have HBD. Are you going to use it? No, I'm just going to hoard it. Why are you hoarding this? Like, the complete, are you going to stake it? Okay, that's a different idea. Now you can stake it and okay, I understand what you're doing. But just like this, people's like monkey brain impulse to buy and hoard a token and not thinking of what does it do? Does this help you by hoarding it? Do you, all that kind of stuff is just, it's a little bit frustrating sometimes.
And then on the flip side, the reality is on certain tokens, you can use them and earn them at the same time. Mm-hmm. So you can be rewarded for earning them. So then you can build a portfolio without actually having taken any investment risk. Mm-hmm. And this is where I'm like, there's another argument here that isn't just, you're saying buy my shitcoin. It's like, no, we're saying use it and earn it. There's at no point do you need to buy a large amount of it to invest in, right? Unless you want to. So it's like that. And by the way, talking about HBD there, let me give you another angle on this that's quite interesting, maybe for a mind like yours. If you're building an economy where people can spend that stable coin, and then you can see how much spending is happening through the businesses, which are legitimate businesses, you can then start giving loans to those businesses based on their earnings. So you say, if this business is earning $500 a month, we're happy to take HBD and loan it to you for $1,000 or $1,500 worth of HBD because of your earning per month is 500, and then you pay us back at 10% a month, and over a year you earn 120% APR. So now you get into this point where it's like, and that 20% comes from the profits of the business that are being sucked into the ecosystem. So and by doing that, you're injecting stable coins into the economy based on commerce, based on with the collateral being the revenue of that business in the currency itself. So I'm seeing that start to happen where there's certain businesses that we can see are stable. We can see they're making consistent money every month. So we can see they can pay back a loan. And then as long as we don't loan them too much, you can inject crypto into the economy. With a relatively high chance it's going to be paid back with a higher APR than the inflation staking mechanism gives you. So I'm seeing that start to form. It's the very early days of it, but it's very interesting.
Yeah, and that's something that's I think that people don't understand well enough about blockchain. People thought that the blockchain was at first a facilitator for anonymous trade. And it has served in some ways like that, but it's more of a blockchain networks are a massive data mine, right? They're just a massive data source.
Yeah.
And I think that we really need to understand this as soon as possible so we could put the necessary privacy precautions for the individual on there to make sure that people don't end up in a CBDC dystopia. But after you've done that, after you're safe, anything else is digital gold, is the value, the information. And so especially with AI, who could just process this kind of data in some incredible ways. So we could say, look at the entire Hive network. How many payments of HBD were within this value range in this time period to this, to these likely similarly grouped identities. Of course, it's a lot. Since Hive's so transparent, it's a lot easier with Hive than with other chains. But the point is, you can just kind of get some good estimations of capital flows here and there, and just be like, which businesses are growing, which do you need to like invest more in, which ones aren't doing quite as well, what kind of like geographical, and you can actually see in terms of language, for example. And obviously, if someone explicitly puts a tag on it, like a hashtag, that's one thing. But even if they don't, you can start analyzing the text for language and finding like which, and based on quirks of the language, even find out the regionalism. Like you could just even find like how many Welsh people are publishing to Hive. You can just
you can do that by taking the geo coordinates of the shops.
Yes.
So we have the geo coordinates of the shops already. So we already can see which economies are, like Nigeria is very, very strong. Venezuela is very, very strong, for example. And you can see other countries growing. And we're starting to plot these charts of like which economies are growing in these stablecoin spendings. The other thing that we're going to do there that's really interesting is you need what has this become? It's a realization I've had over the last few days. It's a system where people are spending HBD and being incentivized for it, but they are being incentivized to post certain data, right? So it's like, okay, spend HBD, take 2 photos of what you buy, and then post it to chain and get an instant discount for doing that. Now, the next part of that is, what if we just make the data on chain really quite basic? So it's like a photo, it's a proof of the location that they went to. And then they can choose to add additional data to their purchase. So like taking really detailed photos of the products that they buy, but that doesn't go on chain. That goes on a private server, and then they can opt in to sell that data to various different supply chain companies or logistics companies or, big data companies that want that data. And they can do it through a non-KYC account that they've signed up to. They've earned the currency through mining it, through blogging, and they spend it into the economy. And then they start documenting certain elements of their transaction, their real world transaction, more detailed, but it doesn't go on chain. It goes on a private server. Then they opt in to sell it, and they receive the rewards for the sales of that data. That is effectively, and the reason that works is because you can incentivize the initial actions that you need to build a database. And then once you have that data and you've incentivized the community to build it, then you can take part of it and start sectioning it off chain and selling that off chain and return the rewards to the users. I just think that's a very interesting use case that's starting to develop on these types of ecosystems.
Absolutely. And it's funny you mentioned like Nigeria stuff. Shout out to the African man in the Leo live chat. He's apparently one of the Dash people who got on board and started joining the Hive ecosystem after that. Again, nice. I'm not sure if he can of course remind me if I've known him from years past or if I don't know. I don't think I know who he is. Just some random Dash person who's just like, oh, I can.
He's the African man.
Yeah,
he's the African man.
He's the African man because there's only one, as it turns out. He's the one and only, the king of Africa, right? Just shout out to him. He just joined the Threadcast. But yeah, that's very fun stuff. Let's talk about the DAO stuff for just a second before we get it too far into like.
Sure.
Again, there's just so many. This could be a 5-hour show. I don't think we have 5 hours. Really and of course,
by the way, I've just
yes.
The African man's already earned $2 off his recent comment.
Well, nice, perfect. Well, I'll also go back with a Dash account and give my like 2-3 cent upvotes on everyone in the thing. So at least people get a little bit from my side. The DAO stuff, and so just the context. I'm very interested in DAO stuff because first of all, I've been involved in politics and government and things like that from a child. In fact, when I was 14, I participated in a simulated constitutional convention with a bunch of other students to basically redraft the U.S. Constitution as if it was being happened. So that was many, many years ago.
Radical from school.
Yeah. So I was saying I started from very early I've been in this thing. I interned for the George W. Bush White House way back in the day too. Like I've been in that area and then just transitioned to crypto, of course, governance has always been interesting. It became super interesting to me in 2016 or so because I learned about Bitcoin 2012 or so, started using in 2013. 2015, I closed my bank account, or I started living only on Bitcoin. 2016, closed my bank account, and then Bitcoin started having problems. And at that point, it was a year before the block size war thing kicked off, and people were like, oh my gosh, these fees are high. But it already hit me a year earlier because I was actually living on this stuff.
You're actually using
the
it.
best data feed in the world is needing you to pay your bills. So I remember, which by the way, a friend of mine, Kurt Wuckert, who's a kind of in the BSV world, he just interviewed Mike Hearn on his show like this week. And that's very interesting because Mike Hearn is the famous Bitcoin developer who crashed out in early 2016 with this famous blog post, The Resolution of the Bitcoin Experiment, where he was the first high profile person to say there's something wrong and there's trouble in paradise as far as like Bitcoin's peer-to-peer cash kind of thing. So anyway, I didn't believe Mike Hearn at first. I'm like, nah, that guy's being drama queen. But then within a year, I was like done with Bitcoin basically because I couldn't. Anyway, so I had thought that Bitcoin was decentralized. I thought that it had a hash rate based governance system for things. I thought a lot of things about it, and that's why I relied on it. And when I ended up not being able to rely on it, I started to think about like, well, I can't just jump to the next Bitcoin because the same thing can happen. What's going to be different this time? And that was one of the things that kept me in the Dash world since the very early days was the DAO, was the idea of, oh, you can actually, the community has a direct vote in what happens. And you can actually fire a rogue core team if they're not doing the will of the people. You can actually cut off their money and stamp it on the blockchain what they want. And that is what kept me. Yeah, sorry, go ahead. Interject.
Just to add to that, there's a distinguishing thing here. There is what you're talking about has social nuance.
Tons of it.
Liquidity provision and transactions processing. It's not social. It's a deterministic defined event, right? Mm-hmm. So you can use a Bitcoin proof of work hashing algorithm to do that. It doesn't need any nuance. Whereas when you get into things like voting and governance and distribution of funds, and social media, it starts to become very socially nuanced, and you need to have good voting mechanisms for that in place, which Bitcoin just doesn't have.
Yes, and I don't think Satoshi knew it didn't have it. Like that's the thing is the Bitcoin design got so many things right. A lot of things that projects 10 years older than it got wrong, didn't learn, like it got right from the very start, that new projects are just having to still figure out. But this is one blind spot, I think. And obviously, if you look over our shoulders, Hijacking Bitcoin, fantastic book by my friend Roger Ver. And there was a certain amount of hijacking going on. And I think if there was at the time, so 2013, 2014, I would have thought nothing can co-opt Bitcoin. 2016, I would have thought Bitcoin's been co-opted. And 2017, 18, I would be like, nothing with a DAO like that can be co-opted. Now, like the pendulum is not like all the way back here. It's a little bit more measured now where I'm like, well, a DAO is great to have, and I think it solves a lot of these problems, but maybe if Bitcoin had a DAO, it would not have gotten hijacked. Maybe it still would have been. There would have been other steps involved, though. So that's where I'm at now, because I'm kind of I wouldn't call myself a DAO maximalist by any stretch of the imagination, but I would call it as a DAO minimum someone who believes that a DAO is a minimum precondition for a successful long-term decentralized network, but it's not the end. You can't just have a functioning DAO and you're going to be okay. You need other things too. And I just don't quite know what all those other things are yet, but I'm still learning.
I think to me, it comes from the idea of distribution. I think distribution of crypto is incredibly difficult, right? Especially on protocols like Bitcoin, where you can only distribute the initial Bitcoin to miners. So if you have other mechanisms like decentralized voting for content, such as on Hive. So every normal person can post valuable content or contribute to the community and get some distributed crypto. Or a DAO where every normal person can put a proposal in that helps the community and earn some fresh crypto for doing that, for doing some valuable service for the community. These are all different distribution mechanisms that don't just reward the fresh crypto to only technical miners. And I think you need to have that diversity of receiving parties to distribute a token in a fairer, more diverse way. And the more diverse that is, the better, because it just puts it all over the world more easily, instead of into the hands of a few miners.
Yeah, and that's the thing that's very interesting. And I've thought also about proof of work versus proof of stake, where proof of stake seems to be the industry standard today. There was a delegated proof of stake era where everything, mostly Dan Larimer's projects, but a lot of things were just heavily that brand. Proof of work was everything in the beginning. There are these eras of things, and I'm still thinking about what I think is the best model with all of that. Like, I'm not 100% convinced, but one thing I'm starting to lean towards on the proof of work, proof of stake, because it goes into the distribution mechanism idea.
Yes,
is I kind of think that proof of work is a great way to bootstrap a crypto, because it lets everyone participate. It provides liveness guarantees. It just, and mostly it kicks the supply all over the place. Like, people are mining, they're losing money, so they have to sell to pay for their electricity bills, and it gets distributed. It's a great distribution mechanism and early decentralized security mechanism. But over time, it ends up kind of ossifying into these massive mining farms and ASIC manufacturers and things like that. Now, on the other hand, proof of stake, if you start out with, by definition, proof of stake, only people with coins can get more. And so if you start with a poorly distributed supply, which if you start with any kind of a supply, it's almost guaranteed it's going to be suboptimally distributed within the first couple months. It's really hard to just make sure it's set up right away. It's like a long-term thing. Then you're kind of screwed. So it's almost like you need a kicking it out everywhere mechanism, at which mining is a good one, for example. And eventually, once you're established, like, let's just assume Ethereum is a good example, even though I'm not sure it is, but let's just assume, of like, after a long period of time, now you can just afford to be full proof of stake now that you've distributed your supply. So yeah.
Sure. Well, it's something that we talk about a lot as well. We've got a lot of theories on this. So first of all, we don't want to call it proof of stake or delegated proof of stake. The two are separate mining protocols. They're very different. In our opinion, it should be called coin voting and parametered coin voting. That's what it is. So the coin voting, it actually shouldn't be called coin voting. It should be called unparametered coin voting, meaning the richest guy on the chain controls the chain, right? Which is good for liquidity provision, for DeFi, for things that there's no. When you want a neutral financial transaction or neutral financial yield, there's no politics involved in financial yield. Well, there shouldn't be. Everyone should be entitled to the same rights to get the same financial yield. So you don't really mind if the guy at the top is the richest guy, because he's got the most to lose if the system goes wrong. But it does give the rich. It is the rich get richer mentality, and it's very difficult to have social mobility that way. Whereas on DPoS, we want to change the name of that to parametered coin voting, where the richest person on chain does not control the chain. You have to be voted in by the community. So in many cases, you'll see the richest guy on the chain is maybe 5th, 6th, or 7th in the consensus, but is not number one, because you can even get to a situation where the poorest guy on chain has the most votes from the community because they like what he's doing. So you get this. So it's a parameterized coin voting system that doesn't allow the richest guy to dominate, or the richest 2 or 3. The other thing that you see naturally occurring on many chains, and you see this on Bitcoin and Ethereum, mining pools and any type of mining pool, they seem to coalesce in between 2.5 and 3.5 liquidity pools or mining pools. That's just how it kind of naturally coalesces in nature. And you see this on Bitcoin. With the Bitcoin mining pools, you have 2 or 3 dominant pools. You see it on Ethereum. Whereas when you have a parametered coin voting system, it's 20 equal pools and they all have the same vote, right? So we would actually argue that that type of system with a parameter coin voting system is more decentralized, even though people say it's only 20 people. Well, if you look at it as 20 separate mining pools in the traditional sense of proof of stake or unparameter coin voting, then you have something that's far more decentralized, because those small amount of mining operators and mining pools that you can stake to, they really control the chain, and it's only two or three normally. And then Bitcoin's like the Panzer tank. Bitcoin's like on the other extreme, where it's proof of work. So everyone's forced to mine everything. So it's super slow, but it's super secure. So you can have really good collateral on things like Bitcoin. You have a lot of collateral there very stably. So I think Bitcoin will become like a collateral layer as a proof of work. I think Ethereum type models and proof of stake or unparameter coin voting is good for DeFi and the provision of yield. And I think that the social side needs to be done by DPoS type systems or parameter coin voting systems where you can get more social nuance into the ecosystem, because it's not looking at liquidity. It has the ability to vote out the richest guy on chain. And if they don't demonstrate the values of the community back to the community itself when they're running the technology, then they can be voted out of the infrastructure.
Yeah.
So
Well,
something like that.
let's break down, I guess in the Vegas terms, probably the recent Hive DAO stuff, and just kind of use that as a springboard to continue the just greater DAO conversation. So
Sure.
I'm not super up on everything, Hive DAO and stuff, but I'm just showing like the Peak D proposals page, and there's all these proposals. From my understanding, I'm pretty familiar with the way, it's very familiar to my understanding of the way, for example, the Dash DAO works. There's proposals. People submit proposals. They get voted on based on voting thresholds. They could get paid out. With the Dash system, at least, there's a certain amount of coins available each month, and if you're below that threshold, you just don't get funded. There's a certain minimum. I think it's a net 10% of the masternodes have to vote for you to be included, and then there's just only so much in the budget. And so then a lot of times masternodes will change their votes at the last minute to just try to shuffle around to see what they can fit in the budget for the month. And it seems like the Hive's version of that is this thing called the return proposal, which just gives all the money back to the network as opposed to spending it. And so if you have no return proposal, or it's down at the bottom, then everything above it gets funded. But then if the higher the return proposal gets, then the more things get excluded. And so it's just kind of the bar of above and below. So that's
the way the community can set the bar, because the community has to vote on that bar basically. So the more votes it gets, the higher up it goes. And if it consumes your project, then your project gets defunded. So if people don't like that your project's being funded, then they can vote on it. In my opinion, it's still a very rudimentary way to do it, but it's interesting. It kind of works, kind of doesn't. It's not perfect. And one thing I wanted to ask you is the Dash DAO the oldest DAO? Or it's certainly one of them.
Definitely the oldest. First is the heart. It's difficult because some people try to argue that Bitcoin's a DAO, and I don't agree, but whatever. But there's some argument that maybe BitShares, which was possibly a DAO, depending on how
they didn't have a DAO built on it in that sense, as far as I'm aware, because it's the same technology as BitShares on Hive, and that was built as a separate fork after the fork away from Steam. So I very much doubt that BitShares had a DAO, but maybe I'm wrong.
Did Steam have a DAO from the
no
at all? So it is interesting then. Yeah. So as far as I know, I'm pretty confident that Dash is either the first or one of the very first, but definitely the oldest. I think around 10 years right now as far as the DAO component, and just kicking on ever since. And it's one of those things that like DAOs were super hyped for a while, and then they kind of went away. Yeah. Now there's still sort of an element of all crypto projects. There's almost always a DAO somewhere. But a lot of people don't realize that like the OG is still there, still kicking. And it's just, it's got to be a very, I guess, similar thing. How often does the Hive, is there a voting cycle for the Hive DAO, or is it like a daily thing, or what?
No, I mean, you can submit a proposal and you vote for it when you're ready to. They put the dates on the proposal should be funded by, but it's just got a funding period, and then if you vote, you vote. And this is one of the.
Is it a daily payout then?
Yeah, it's a daily payout.
Yeah, so with the Dash thing, that's the big difference. Is the Dash thing is a monthly thing. So every
Okay.
month the super block gets paid out. So the Dash coin emission looks like a heartbeat because every month there's a spike
Right, right,
from
right,
that
right.
thing. And it just, at the
Okay.
end of the voting period, the voting period is just the whole month. And then at the end, by the voting deadline, how are the votes? And then it just timestamps that. And then everyone gets paid out from the
I
block
see.
reward to those addresses that they put in. And then the just cycle repeats. Where it
So
seems like
if
the
it
Hive
passes the
thing is just
voting,
similar but daily.
it's daily, yeah. And with the Dash one, if you don't get your funding votes by the end of the month, do you just have to roll it over to the next month if you want funding for the next month, or
You can
does it
submit
just go away?
you can submit. It depends on the proposal. Some people do a one-off proposal, and it's a one dash fee to submit it. So as an anti-spam method, right? And so you submit a proposal, and it's just for 1 month, and that means at the end of the month, it's just goes away. You have to do another one, or you could do a multi-month proposal, like some people do with like I personally tend to do like quarterly ones, like that run for 3 months, and so each month it's still up for voting. So you could be funded the first month, then defunded the second month, but then back in the third month. But it's just the proposal persists during those months. And so it's still every month it gets voted on if you get money or not, but it's you can just in one go submit a proposal that lasts for a while. So yeah, it's kind of the same thing.
Sure, sure. So yeah, so the Hive one is daily, and the proposal stays open for as long as you put the date on, and then if you get voted in that time, you'll get funded from that point forward. So if you get funded after you start, you want the proposal to start. So let's say you put the proposal in a month from now to start funding, and you don't get voted until 6 weeks from now, then you lose that first 2 weeks of funding. But you'll get funded the rate every day that you want until the end of your proposal.
Yeah, it's so basically there's a whole bunch of Hive projects, and I'm not super deep into the Hive ecosystem, but I did recognize over half of them, I think, as far as like, oh yeah, I know who Peak D is, I know VSC, I know Keychain, I know, Easton C, I know all these kinds of things. And uh, it's kind of interesting. So Inleo's been sort of, and as a disclaimer for everyone who's seeking high drama, I'm not. This is not going to be high. This is not going to be big drama show in this time. Um, I'll let people do the personal stuff behind it. I'm going to pretend like I'm just like I have no insider knowledge from either party or anything or any parties, but just the facts, ma'am. Journalism style, right? Old school journalism style. Uh, Basically, Inleo has been one of the larger proposals, one of the larger projects on Hive, especially recently. And I've worked with them with the Dash ecosystem and a lot of onboardings and stuff like that. Obviously a big fan of the project. Obviously, at the same time, I'm an outsider to the DAO, so I don't. While I'm like, yeah, sure, give Leo money. Of course, that's like my default opinion from that, but that ignores all the nuance of the actual DAO because I don't actually know. So basically, they asked for a significant chunk of change for onboardings, and it seems like for the most part, over time they got broad community support, and when I checked a few different times over the last few months, they were in funding. And basically, the only reason I'm bringing the DAO thing up at all, this thing, is because they got kicked out of funding, not because they got voted against, from my understanding, but because one individual in particular put a large vote on the return proposal and essentially defunded everyone as a kind of, and obviously there's no messaging behind that explicitly, but the implicit messaging is clearly I do not support this proposal being funded, at least not at the level that it is, and I am willing to at least threaten defunding the entire ecosystem in order to make that message heard. And since then, the nuclear threat of the return proposal being pushed above everything else seems to have gone away, and some people have removed their support for the Inleo proposal, and now that is below the funding threshold. So it seems like this person got what they wanted out of it. Again, tons of backdoor discussions and drama, I'm sure are around this, but it's just kind of an interesting thing as me with a bucket of popcorn watching of like,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
know some things, but largely I don't. And that's a great position because I've been in a position in DAO things and other DAOs where I have been somewhere the subject of some drama like this, and it's intensely stressful, and it's not fun at all.
Sure,
And so
sure.
now I'm glad to not be in that position this time, and just be like watching. Is like, ooh, what's gonna happen?
Finally, Joel's not involved in the drama.
Yeah. Well, not this drama. I'm involved in some DAO drama anyway, but that's just always the thing.
So that's very interesting to hear. You know, as the guy that's probably been involved in DAOs longer than anyone in the industry, more or
Hmm.
less, it's very interesting to see your take on that and to see you watching it closely. Um, I think one of the things with a DAO is that it's social by nature, right? It's a
Hmm.
social thing. If you get unvoted, it's very much focused on you. Or if you put a vote in that defunds everyone else, everyone's looking at you and going, "What the hell?" Like, you know, it's very social by
It's a
nature, very
yeah,
different to
high
the
risk.
whole proof of work, the
Yeah, and
proof of stake type thing.
I will say, some extra bit of info that does differentiate all this. The Dash DAO is anonymous, meaning
Mm,
it's a masternode has a vote. Sometimes people own multiple masternodes, and
mm.
sometimes a whale will own a lot. Although there's in the last few years, I've seen almost no whales. In fact, Binance I think is the largest whale, and they've never voted, and
Hmm.
they have well under 10% of the network, if less. And
Am
so
I right in saying with Binance that they could use custodial stake of Dash on exchanges against the Dash community to vote in a proposal on Dash?
they
Is that
could, but first off, they do run, as far as I'm aware, they used to run at least 270 master nodes, and
wow?
they because they get rewards from it, right? They get
Yeah,
and
yeah,
so I don't think that I think that must be part of their staking program where they run it and then they pay, you know, to depositors out of that or
yeah,
something like that.
yeah.
But they have never voted, and they seem extremely passive in this case. But they're not really.
Credit to Binance for that. Credit to Binance for that, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
they're just doing their thing. And to be fair, that's also Binance with Steam up until a critical juncture, right?
Yes,
That's the thing
yes.
is they
This
also
is why
didn't
I asked the
care.
question because it's obviously a concern
Yes,
of mine.
but the point is the only finding out who the whales are takes some sleuthing, where you have to do
Yeah,
pattern analysis and stuff, watching about when the votes fall, and a really good master could find their ways of like spreading out voting behavior to hide who
sure,
they are. But it's
sure.
otherwise completely anonymous. Sometimes you know who these whales are as far as their actual identity. Almost
Yeah.
never as far, and there's actually a site called mnowatch.org or masternodeownerwatch.org, this kind of thing. It looks like a potato. It's a disgusting looking website, but it's very good as a data source, and it does give pseudonyms to all these whales that they know. Like this guy's 20
Right,
nodes.
right.
We'll call him Johnny or something. But like
Known
almost all
whales.
of
Yeah,
these are not known beyond just we see them on the
right.
network. But like so
It's
they're
it's very important. It's very important to have a substantial proportion of your community. I don't know how much as anonymous voters, so people don't know who
yeah.
they are. You
And so
know.
that's the funny thing is like there was some grumpy whale that has torpedoed some good proposals in the past. I don't think he's active anymore, but I think his name was Wee Johnny. People called him that, but no one ever saw.
That's probably it's probably why he was a frustrated whale.
Yeah, but like no one ever identified him or took
Yeah,
forum posts or anything like that. But it's funny in this case, in the case of the Hive drama, it's very clear. Everyone knows exactly who that person looks like,
yeah,
etc. Who caused a lot
yeah,
of this, or it caused drama. I'm not going to say that, but
yeah,
who did this voting behavior, and so
yeah.
it's the weight of that is so much more fascinating to me. You know?
Mm. It's interesting because there are also anonymous accounts that are whales on Hive that no one knows who they are that vote, and they also
Hmm.
voted in this as well. I don't know if you know, but it wasn't just that one actor that acted on his
Hmm.
own. He acted with multiple other people, and some of those people were anonymous, and we don't know who they are. Um, so yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's social by nature in that sense, and
Hmm.
there must be a lot of pressure. You know, you can see, especially if you're a public figure in those Hatch's accounts, there can be a lot of public, social pressure on you to vote or unvote.
Hmm.
Um, so it's drama, but also I think I don't know this for sure. I don't know this for sure, but I do believe, and I honestly have never confirmed this with are we gonna name the party, or are we gonna?
You can if you want. That's up to you because
I
again.
mean, it's block trades on Hive. He's one of the
Hmm.
biggest whales on Hive, and he rarely votes, but sometimes he does move his weight around. So
Yeah.
this is why it kind of spiked attention.
And I
He
don't
also
know him
voted with
super well, but I did meet him and say hi. He seemed like a fine
yeah.
guy. That's all. I have
He's
very little data on him though.
Yeah, well, I think that's the way he likes it. He doesn't
Hmm.
want to be like a Vitalik Buterin character or a Dan Larimer character that gets known. He wants to work humbly away, and he does will do a lot of work on the chain.
Hmm.
And people like him for that, And he doesn't kind of come out as the top figure of Hive, but he's a very, very influential person on Hive and does a lot of the development of the core code, and spent a
Hmm.
lot of his own funds doing it. So people have a lot of respect for him. So when he does a move like this, people really look and like go, oh. And I think in his mind, for whatever reason, he thought it was probably an attack on the chain.
Hmm.
Yeah. So if you look at it from that point of view, because to vote, one thing, if you focus on solutions, really, it would be nice to have sliding vote scales, so you don't have to put 100% of your
Yes.
vote on the DAO. So he could have just voted just above to defund Leo if he wanted to, but instead he had to vote his full amount because that's the only option you've got, and it defunded everybody,
Hmm.
right? But then you go, well, hold on, this guy's worked on the chain for like 9 years, right?
Hmm.
He's put he's down millions of dollars probably because he's put so much dev resources in it, and he's voting to defund every freaking project except for one that was a bit higher,
Yeah.
in order to stop what looks like stop this project from being funded.
Yeah. And so
And
that's
I'm just like,
definitely it created what could be considered an existential crisis, which means from his perspective, again, I'm just making assumptions based on behavior that if logically, if someone were to cause an existential crisis to the chain of some kind or something in that territory, uh, it would be because they considered it necessary to stop an even greater
yes,
existential crisis. And
yes,
of course, who
yes.
the hell knows who's right or wrong in the situation? And I'm enjoying being like behind the glass looking in on this thing because I'm like, oh, this is
Good for you.
interesting.
Look at you.
But I'm like, wow, because I did not see that. I'm not very close in the Hive ecosystem, but I also did not see that coming, and I think it's very
Yeah, nor did
fascinating that
we.
it did.
And that's the only thing that I can determine it as is that type of drastic behavior is because it's seen as an attack on the chain. So I'm sure you have the same thing in the
Hmm.
Dash DAO where um, someone could put a proposal in to drain the DAO, right? And if that gets voted in, I'm sure many of you would see it as an attack on the chain. Now, I'm not saying that's what in Leo were doing, but I think that's how it was interpreted, maybe.
Hmm.
But again, I don't. This is not quoting from the horse's mouth. I don't know, but I just look at that behavior and I'm like, that's the type of behavior, that's the type of action you would take if you were trying to defend the chain from an attack. So I think there's some element of that in there,
Yeah.
and I'm sure lots. The InLeo community. I've got a lot of time for InLeo community. They're great.
Hmm.
It's one of the best communities on Hives
Shout
in
out to
terms
all
of
the
the
lions
activity,
in
the
the
amount of views.
threadcast right now.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of
I've got
other.
nothing against those people. But at the same time, you also have to look at the actions from the other side and be like, well, maybe that's how he interpreted it. Maybe he interpreted it that way incorrectly. But we're all living in this room, right? It's,
Yes.
society is basically a room full of people, and we've all got to figure out how to navigate our way through that room. And maybe there's other things that could have been done to alleviate that concern from people like block trades
Hmm.
before the proposal was put in. And that's something I advise a lot. When you put a
Hmm.
proposal in, you really have to speak to all the stakeholders first before you put your proposal in,
Yeah.
especially one at that size. That was a huge proposal. I think the second biggest in Hive's history. Um,
Which was the
and
biggest? Do you know? Just off the top of your
um,
head.
I think it was VSC. I think it was VSC.
Interesting.
Um,
Yeah, another very
but
exciting proposal as far as like the tech is concerned.
yeah, and here's the difference. So like VSC is trying to. There's no token involved in VSC. It's all open source technology. It's all owned by the community, and you use HBD as your resource staking credit. So it's for the Hive community.
Hmm.
Whereas some people would interpret the Leo side. It's a closed source system.
Hmm.
Um, so it's the IPs owned by Cal.
Hmm.
Um, which it's very much, the idea of the DAO funding closed source technology. Steam's been burned before with DLive. DLive was on Steam originally, took loads of
Oh
money
yeah,
from
I
Steam
tried to
Inc. and
use
then
D
left.
Live back in the day. I remember I didn't like it much, but whatever. It's a different story.
So, and I'm not saying that Leo's going to
Hmm.
leave. I don't personally believe that they are, but it's like you got to look at previous behaviors. That thing's still with the Hive community, and the
Hmm.
same thing could happen with Leo after funding. Um,
Yeah.
and then to me, if I was to have done it, my advice to Cal was to submit $40,000 and
Hmm.
do one onboarding of one community, and
Hmm.
then try another one if that was successful. Whereas putting the whole amount in, it certainly perked the interest of people like block trades who would be like, oh,
That's
that's a
cool.
lot of
Yeah.
money. What's going on there? You
Yeah,
close
and I
source.
have to say there are
So
parallels where there's been so many times there's been discussions within the Dash community about, oh, why don't you put in for smaller amount because this, or why don't you separate it just in case they don't buy all your proposals? You put in three, and they like this, and this is all very familiar territory. And one thing I should
sure.
say also regarding like funding in the early day, the Dash DAO is so battle hardened today compared to all the nonsense that went through. And
Yeah.
in the 2017 to 2019 era, there was a lot of crap that was funded in terms of like money down the drain for big splashy marketing projects that didn't deliver, or just people never delivered or scamming or whatever. A lot of that stuff went away. And there's kind of a vibe, and there's also like some companies that were paid a significant amount of money to integrate Dash, and some did, and some did, and then disintegrated it, right? And with the open, just this comes from like the open source comment. Typically, the Dash DAO will fund open source development for Dash, or there's a legal entity that it's a novel legal entity because it's owned by the DAO, even though the DAO doesn't have to actually docs any of its members for this, called the Dash Investment Foundation, which is able to own legal property and stake in companies and things like that. And so usually the two paths are, okay, are you going to build open source tech that anyone in the Dash community can use? Yes. Sure, here. Straight for, get raw dog it right from the treasury, right? Or are you going to do closed source business stuff? Then get it through the diff and give the diff legal equity in your company. And it's like one or the other. And so
Interesting.
it would be
So
interesting.
the diff.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. The diff is an entity that can have ownership in DAO based projects.
Yes,
Is what I'm
it's
understanding.
and
Interesting.
it's the supervisors are elected by Dash DAO vote. It's so because of that,
Right.
even though it's a legal entity and everything like that, it is technically owned by the completely anonymous Dash DAO, right? The no KYC, whatever. So it's a very interesting. I think it's a Cayman Islands legal structure that's very novel and has
Right.
only been around for a few years. The structure at all, and so it's an interesting
Yeah.
kind of thing. Maybe that would be an awesome thing for the Hive DAO to explore.
Well, it's something that we've considered a lot, but we just haven't ever taken action on it.
Well, if
But I think
anyone
it's
wants
an
to
interesting
copy
angle.
copy our homework, I'd be happy to connect with all the right people
I
to
mean,
look
that
into
might be
that.
very interesting. Because here's the thing: like, we would love that mechanism for
Hmm.
D Life, right?
Hmm.
Like, they shouldn't have taken the money and then just left.
Yeah.
There should have been some obligation to stay around. But of course, when you're talking about a truly decentralized DAO, there is no mechanism through which to pursue people. But then at the same time, I know a lot of the whales on Hive are not interested in legal action and legal entities, and they've got their reasons for that. So they just don't want the attention. And part of, I think, the good thing about Hive is that it's gone under the radar for so long, so that they've managed to fix a lot of the scaling issues before it needs to scale. Um, and so there's a large, long debate going on about whether we have a legal entity or not. But certainly, if you've done it successfully, it's certainly an example that maybe is useful for Hive in the future. Um, but yeah, very interesting because another question is, if you have a project that's proposed and then it gets funded by the DAO and is successful because of the DAO funding, and then it makes a profit in future,
Hmm.
how do you and that profit comes in the form of fiat in some way? How do you make sure that gets back into the DAO? I
Yeah.
mean, you could do it voluntarily, but how do you actually have a legal mechanism to get that to flow
There's a
back
few
in?
things that were
Very
explored in
interesting.
that case. I think the way it ends up going is reinvestment into other companies. And so is the way the community. So the most direct way would be for the fiat earned from this to be used to buy and then burn Dash to make it more scarce, kind of thing. That'd be a way you
Yeah.
give back. But that hasn't
Sure.
ever happened. The Dash Investment Foundation invested in why am I blanking on the name all of a sudden because of the Valkyrie investment. And Valkyrie started one of the first Bitcoin ETFs that got approved in terms of it was the BRR ticker one. So that was Valkyrie. So Dash was a seed investor in Valkyrie, and then Valkyrie
Oh,
ended
yeah,
up getting
yeah. Okay.
spun down, and there's some equity that can be turned on. Ionia is another company that was doing a lot of crypto-based things, and they've done very well as far as I'm aware. They had to leave the crypto industry for legal reasons, so they're in the legacy fintech industry, so they're no longer really helping. But in terms of like, they're not helping the value proposition of Dash, but Dash has equity in that company. Edge Wallet is
Right.
another one that there's some equity in. There's a Brazilian microinsurance company called 88i that is partially owned by Dash, and then like the list goes on. There's a bunch of these
So
portfolio
they're all doing
companies.
buy and burns, are they?
Well,
Or
they're
that's where you wanted them to get to?
so far it's just been buy, and then at this point, so far it's just been buy equity in companies, and obviously it's not like liquid assets. And so far, nothing that I know of has been really spun down. But my personal recommendation, because now there's not a lot of money for the diff to invest, would be to just reinvest. Like take that out and be like, hey, Trust Wallet, do you want to integrate all these special Dash
Yeah.
features and give us some equity? Here's some money.
Yeah.
And those kinds of
It's
things.
it's from a sustainable source of income. So that's what that's the difference between a rich person and a poor person. The poor person will get some savings and spend them, whereas the rich person will figure out how to take a loan out on those savings and then build a business and live off the revenue of the business. And I think that's where some of the DAOs need to get to. It's interesting. I mean, there's potentially a lot of controversy there as well, though. I assume from your part, where someone could run off with the money somehow, or
Yeah.
is there risks of that? But I understand you've got your central legal entity that could pursue them for that. But
Yes. And it is legally, like you could say, you could legally vote in a different, or with the DAO, vote in another legal supervisor that did this, and
Yeah.
then sue and say, this, according to this blockchain time-stamped vote, as evidence
Yeah,
here,
yeah.
is the rightful representative. Therefore, blah
Yeah.
blah blah. You could actually do.
Yeah.
So that's just an interesting thing in the world that's ever evolving in terms of like what is and isn't
Sure.
legal.
Sure.
But so just to sort of wrap up on the controversial part about the existential thing, a few elements of it. It's funny because there still seems to be some mystery around the motivations, despite it being a very known person. There was a Dash thing that happened a few years ago, is very similar in some ways. That was the opposite, whereas like the parties were a lot more anonymous, but the actual motivation was crystal clear. We'll get to that in just a second. But the funny thing about this thing is it seems like a few motivations could be okay. Too much money is going in this direction, and if more keeps going in this direction, eventually Hive becomes a proprietary blockchain of Inleo in practical terms. Maybe that's a thought of like, oh, before you know it, Inleo becomes 80% of all Hive activity, and therefore it's not really, it's not really a fully diversified, decentralized ecosystem anymore. Maybe that's the case. Maybe, as you mentioned, it's a concern of too much stuff, too much money and things like that into closed source architecture. Maybe there's a thing about concern about other tokens being involved, whether it's the cross-chain stuff or the Leo token itself. Maybe there's all kinds of different avenues of concern that this could have happened. But it is kind of interesting. And of course, then there's the super, I guess, jaded, cynical perspective, which is the person in question, Block Trades, decided wanted to keep his position as the top dog of the big fish in the small pond, and thought, I got to cut Leo off at the knees to make sure they don't get too big, because then I might lose my number one influence spot, and I want to hold on to power. So again, I'm not making I don't know if any of these are true or how much of them they're true, but this is just a thought exercise of motivations of DAO voting things.
Yeah.
It's kind of
There's
interesting.
a couple of interesting things there. First of all, I mean, knowing block trades and knowing the type of person he is, I very much doubt that he's got this number one top dog type mentality. I really don't think that's the reason. I think you were probably closer to some of the things that you said prior to that.
Hmm.
There's other things about the history of Leo that maybe not everyone's aware of, but certainly the Leo community are, and there's controversies that happen that still carry forward through to today.
Hmm.
And I just think it's a number of those things that add up, and eventually it's caused block trades to make a vote to do what he sees as just holding the horses on something that maybe could become a risk to Hive in the future. Um,
Yeah.
and you know, I don't want to speak for block trades at all. I'm sure that if he wants to, he will make a public statement on the reasons why. All of this is speculation and guessing, and
Hmm.
you know, but I do want to make a point that I'm, you know, knowing block trades and the type of person that he is, I very much doubt there's an ego thing here. I very much doubt there's a number one top spot. You know, any witness that prevents an ecosystem from growing like that, in my opinion, shouldn't be elected in the top 20.
Hmm.
You know, if there's that type of thing going on, I think Hive's been very good at that in the past. There's been various controversial actions that have been done by certain members of the witness pool in the past, and they've been elected out in 2 or 3 days, straight down. You know,
Hmm.
and I think if that was the case here, then that would also be reflected in the Hive DAO. I wouldn't be on Hive if I didn't think that was the case. I think it's something more. I think it's a technical thing. I think it's a risk thing. I think it's seen as a potential attack, and those factors are there for reasons. Like there's reasons in the history as to why those things could be deduced from this scenario. And further than that, you know, I'm sure if Block Trade wants to make a comment publicly, he will. I'm no spokesperson of him at all, and I'm, you know, a lot of this is speculation. And but you know, seeing it from both sides, because at the same time, like Leo's doing a fantastic job in terms of marketing and putting the name out there. So it's like you hear a lot from in Leo on the interwebs, and you don't hear very much from Block Trades because he's just not that type of guy. He's more passive in that sense. So it, you know, it feels a bit one-sided in that sense, and
Hmm.
you might reach the conclusion there's something malicious going on here, but I genuinely don't think it's malicious. I think it's probably like an experienced guy, a really experienced guy,
Hmm.
checking a younger guy and just going, "Whoa, hold on a minute. There's loose ends here that you need to tie up." For me, the big one is it's not open source.
Hmm.
You know, I mean, you shouldn't be using a DAO to fund closed source projects, and part of
Yeah,
Leo
and
is open source,
you know
but
what's funny about that is that's a value judgment, and it's kind of funny. This goes back to the whole maximalist discussion of there are certain cypherpunk values that some people work to
they won't
very.
compromise on.
Some people are
Yeah,
super hardcore about, and some
yeah.
people are complete, you know, sellouts on, I guess, and some other people are much more in the middle on that stuff. And it's kind of interesting how like some people in crypto have an almost they're so cypherpunk to the point they're almost like communists as far as like they don't believe in profit, they don't believe in the successful having more than others, they don't believe in companies even, everything should be free and open and there is no reason for closed source anything. And then all the way down to just like, you know, people that have no, they don't really care about decentralization at all. There's like, and there's a
Hmm.
big spectrum in there, and it's kind of interesting how like for my like just two arguments on the in Leo thing on both sides, you know, playing both sides of the issue maybe. On the one hand, in Leo should definitely grow because they're getting a lot more Hive users and Hive usage. On the other hand, the should the DAO as in all of Hive be funding something that doesn't serve necessarily all of Hive? That's another perspective, and it's like interesting. And here the thing about DAOs and stuff, there is no right answer. The right answer is what the DAO picks, and that's not even the right answer. That's
Right.
just what the DAO. That's just the will of the DAO. It could be the wrong
Yeah.
answer, but it is. It is. It's just kind of fascinating to see the value systems play out in these DAOs.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's what it really is. I think you hit the nail on the head there. There's a set of value systems that people work to. And in this case, I think that value system wasn't seen as being followed. And people moved their votes to the point where they defunded most of the other projects on Hive. I mean, that's a serious move. That's a serious move, and you have to pay attention to that move, especially if you're part of that community. I do not think it's malicious. I think comes from a genuine place, and I just think Blocktrade was acting in what he saw as the best interest of the community. It doesn't necessarily mean it was, like you say, but that's the way it's ended up. But there's definitely no ego there, as far as I can tell. Like, the guy's genuine as hell, and I've got a lot of time and respect for Blocktrade in terms of the way that he works.
Yeah, and it's also just like the way, some things are just. That's the other thing. As I mentioned in some posts today, I can't remember my exact wording, but basically, the best tech does not always win necessarily. Everything has to do with, like a lot. You can have the most best decentralized system in the world, but based on the people who happen to have gotten involved for certain reasons, it could sink or swim based on that. And we'd like to believe that decentralization means people don't matter, but unfortunately, people always matter, and you have to be.
It's the Pareto principle.
Yes,
it comes into play every time. If you've got a free market, you're going to have people with more stake than others. One of my arguments would maybe be that someone like Blocktrade has got a lot. Well, it's interesting because in the whole, this is where I come to the 2-layer voting system, because in the whole scheme of the DAO, the whole scheme of Hive, Blocktrade's stake isn't that big. But when it comes to, and you get people actively voting for witnesses, and it's pretty decentralized. It's pretty well distributed. But but the witness votes, it's very easy to keep on top of 30 witnesses, and it's very, it doesn't expire for a year. I think every year you have to revote. Whereas with the DAO, it's moving along. So for example, I'm guilty of this. I don't pay that much attention to the DAO. I'm busy running 3Speak and Speak Network and Distriator. I do that. So I'm
useful.
I'm trying to build positive things, so I focus on that. Whereas Dan, my partner, I proxy my votes to him. So he's kind of like my politician. I proxy my stake to him, and he votes on my behalf. And he likes to spend more time thinking about the game theory of the DAO and what should be voted, what shouldn't be voted, and witness votes, and who's good, who deserves to be a witness and not. So I let him look after that, and I trust him to do that. Now, this in the 6 years or so that we've worked together, this is the first time that we've had a bit of a controversy, because it was a very controversial vote. And so he voted one way, and I had my objections, but at the same time, I've got to trust him because I'm proxying my vote to him, and I'm not going to remove my proxy just for one thing.
Yeah.
So there's that element of it as well. Right?
Yeah, and it's kind of funny how a lot of these votes and these actions are very heated in the moment. In long term, they're looked back on as a historical marker, right? As in, this is what happened, and it's people analyze things like. I'm sure people who have direct ancestry to historical events sometimes get upset thinking about history or get worked up. But for the most part, if I'm looking at the history of the Mongol Empire, for example, sometimes I can think of the barbaric piles of skulls and make emotional value judgments on that. But as far as the rest, it's just fascinating. Just it's context to where we are today. And it's kind of this.
If only they had a DAO, eh?
Mongol DAO. I'm sure Mongol DAO exists somewhere, but you know how it is.
It sounds like a great name anyway. You should start it.
Yeah, but so it was kind of funny because of the parallels. There was and I dropped something in the Threadcast. There's a link to a podcast I did about 3 years ago. If anyone's a DAO nerd, you should watch that, and I'm going to explain the context for it here, which is so Dash was founded by a certain individual named Evan Duffield. And that was 2014, January. And he was involved with the project very kind of as the steward of sorts, even though it became a DAO within a year. He was kind of like the big voice, but not super. He was never a pushy, a leader type. He was always just a very, ethereal kind of coming in here with these interesting ideas, proposing things. He was never really was
really nice thing to have, in my opinion.
Yeah, and in January of 2016, so 2 years after Dash was created, but 1 year after the DAO was created, he made this famous proposal that said, should Dash pursue an on-chain scaling big block approach or a off-chain, L2 based scaling approach? And that was right when Mike Hearn did his rage quit from Bitcoin Core and stuff. And the network overwhelmingly voted for the big block scaling approach, right? And so that's
On
just,
Dash.
yes. And
That's
so,
interesting.
and it just solidified. So now that's just the way, like, obviously you could have a revote, but it also just answered the question so no one had to fight about it forever.
And do you have a problem with the infrastructure operation like the Bitcoin maxis suggest, where it's going to make it centralized because no one can afford to run the infrastructure?
No, because
Or have
the
you got a mechanism
masters
to deal with
are
that?
paid by the network. And also, thanks to a function called DAPI, or Decentralized API, no one even needs to run a node to be able to access the chain in a decentralized, trust minimized way. So it's just like, all those problems are just gone. It's so nice. And so
And you don't have a dictatorial system potentially forming where a few small number of people can afford to run. Well, if you're saying that
no,
everyone gets paid,
there are also batch like crowd funded nodes being run too. So some people, there's a few companies doing this. There's a few people on their own
sure.
setups. There's all kinds of different things, and I'm
Yeah.
working on trying to help have more solutions for this. But anyway, the point with this is, so that was voted that way, and Evan within a year or so just sort of floated away from the project. He's just like, and he's kind of disappeared. I mean, you see him pop up here and there. He's sort of disappeared. He's on his own thing. He's living life, right? He did his thing, and he's still sort of interested in Dash, but he's out, right? And the director of finance of the core team, who was under him, ended up becoming kind of like the next heir to the throne, as it were, even though there's no throne in a DAO. But so Dash Core Group, as it became like the legal entity around this, and this person assumed the CEO role of this entity. So even though Dash was a DAO, there was a development group that did most of the development, where there was a fellow who had like a CEO sort of title. So there's a little bit of an interesting like interplay between, well, it's a fully decentralized thing, but has sort of a corporate face, like a storefront almost. And so it's an interesting mechanism. And from 2017 to 2022, that's kind of what happened. There was eventually large dissatisfaction with the direction and things that were going on. And so that culminated in this podcast that I did with this fellow, 2022. And shortly after that podcast, the Master Nodes, for the first time ever, voted to defund the core team. But it was very clear the reason for that was because they were dissatisfied with this individual's leadership and performance. And so after it got defunded, the voting deadline hadn't happened yet. And then there was a word that he resigned as CEO, and within minutes, the core team was like refunded. And it wasn't like a person or 5 people. It was like 40 plus individual people that just decided. And it was a lot. I know some of the people involved with the backdoor discussions about this and stuff. And it was definitely like a large community effort on that. But so basically got fired, kicked out. And since then there's no central figurehead of Dash anymore. And there's
so no one actually replaced him. No one actually stepped in to replace him.
Yes, there's thoughts of it. But then right now there's Sam Westridge.
I think it's ultimately it's a security weak point, in my opinion, on these chains.
Yeah.
There's some smart people, don't get me wrong, right? And they're really good, but to put them as the figureheads makes them a focal point.
It's an attack surface for sure.
It's an attack surface. At this point, like, okay, maybe in the early days when you got like the thing being built and you want to put the technology out there and show it's really cool and this great guy's working on it. But if he steps aside and then lets the community organize itself in a decentralized way, it's far more secure. Even if you're not promoting like a top super smart guy to the top, I think it's still more beneficial.
Yeah. And so the result of this is, who used to be the iOS app developer key in the core team and then ended up being kind of the lead for the Evolution platform. Sort of, he's the lead developer of Dash, sort of, Sam Westridge. But then since then, the core team that he's sort of leads, but sort of doesn't, right? Because there's like 3 different departments, roughly speaking, in this entity, which is mobile product development, the core protocol, and then the Evolution platform. And he runs the Evolution platform. And the other 2 have other, they're kind of co-equals to him. So it's kind of like those three in the same organization. But that entire organization stopped doing business development and marketing entirely. And that's something that I picked up doing at the end of, the beginning of 2024. And so, and then there's another development group that now does a whole lot of other things. And then there's a few other groups too. So there is no figurehead. There is no central thing. If you could say there's figureheads, there might be two, which would be Sam and myself. We're kind of like, although I'm much more public, he doesn't come out a lot in public, but it's like, who's the Dash? Who's the CEO of Dash? Is like,
yeah,
you can't put a finger on it. And it's kind of interesting with Hive because the devastation of the Steam problems, like it got rid of the figurehead though, right?
We didn't even want the company after that. Mm-hmm. That was the thing. It wasn't just the CEO of the company. The whole company went. Mm-hmm. So this is where, like, probably, the cultural reason why Hive doesn't have a foundation or anything like Dash has on its DAO is because of this. It was such a brutal revolution, the fork, that even the Steam It Inc. Entity itself went away along with the CEO and everyone that controlled it. So then as a result, you've got influential figures in Hive, but that's just because they've either purchased stake off the open market or they've earned it over time. Mm-hmm. And everyone jostles for position, right? And that's kind of a more decentralized point, and it's got its flaws, but at the same time, there is no central figurehead that can be gone after. And I genuinely think if there was, I probably wouldn't be here anymore, because what we're building is very disruptive, especially to the entrenched old economy. And so at a certain point, and I'm sure you feel the same about Dash, if it gets real mainstream, I should say, once these protocols get mainstream adoption, because I'm fairly convinced they it's either that or nothing. And most of the attack layers are removed now. So if not all of them. So at some point we're going to tip a scale and piss someone off, right? And then it's like, well, we kind of already did it on Hive, when we took the Hive name, the community didn't know that there was already a company called Hive Blockchain Technologies in the ecosystem, which is it's a legitimate Canadian mining company that mines crypto. Its leader's Frank Holmes, is all over the news. Nice guy, seems to be. But we didn't know about that company at the time. And when I say we, I mean the wider community. And when they took the name Hive, they weren't aware of Hive Blockchain Technologies. And so then about 2 weeks later, Hive Blockchain Technologies wrote a cease and desist order to say, stop using our name. It's our IP. We've built this IP. And the Hive community kind of looked at each other and went, oh, shit, what are we going to do about this? This guy's making a point. He's going to sue us. And then when I say we, I mean, I only say we because I was watching the conversation happen. But the community kind of all looked at each other and went, well, who's he going to sue? Who's going to sue? There is no community here. There's no entity. Sorry, there is a community, but there's no entity. So that's another reason that, probably the Hive DAO doesn't have an entity behind it at the moment. And so there's all these different factors that play into it. But to me, at that moment, it proved that Hive was decentralized. It was like, okay, I get it. That's powerful. And I think this same model, I'm not saying the Hive model necessarily, but the same mentality should be, and I think it will naturally progress to all other brands. I think brands like Hive you're going to get communities dropping tokens to the Nike community without giving any tokens to the CEO or the foundation of Nike or the company of Nike. And then Nike's going to be pissed off about it. But the ones that realize it's actually a good thing and it's empowering and it helps you empower your community and distribute more value to them are the ones that are going to benefit from this way of working in the future, I think. And yeah, that's how you know someone's decentralized. If it can't be sued, you can't sue a community, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where, like, it's a lot of this stuff, like, it's just a natural, like, mathematical equation, which is the smaller, like, if you have 5 people involved in your organization, the power of one person becomes much more, one person can make a much bigger difference. And so when you're very small and new, it makes more sense to have more of a leadership or a centralization of some sort, because a lot of times when you don't have it, you just, like, the 5 people don't coordinate and it just goes to zero quickly. Then also, like, if you stamp out a 5-person organization, no one really cries either. because it just doesn't matter that much. It's a tiny thing. But then as it grows, the attack surface from having a central figurehead or a single entity under it starts to grow. It becomes worse.
Yeah.
And also the possibility of flourishing of having no central head also increases. So kind of like the pendulum with the proof of work becomes less decentralized over time because it kind of centralized in that, and proof of stake becomes more. It's one of those sorts of same pendulums where at a certain point, you do sort of need to get rid of, at a certain level of growth, you become more decentralized or need to become more decentralized. And the funny thing about this is, at a certain size, unfortunately things, if you have a very decentralized, like no one's taking initiative kind of community that's tiny, the odds of it growing are very small a lot of times. But if you have a couple strong personalities involved who are really dedicated towards this and maybe financially invested again, then there's much more of a chance that it gets big. The problem is, once you need to start decentralizing, there's these natural barriers to that, where the people in power want to maintain the power as it goes on. So unfortunately, some of the best projects need to have a semi-cataclysmic event that just cuts the head off. And at that point, it's binary. Do you sink or swim from there? And it's kind of like, it's happened to Dash, it's happened to Hive, and I'd love to study more. It happened to Bitcoin Cash as well. It's like a lot of these different ecosystems have had that, and it's kind of interesting.
We call it the Petri dish model, where you can create the environment for decentralization, but you can't guarantee that it's going to decentralize. All you can do is provide the tools and hope that over time it maintains its decentralization. And most of the truly decentralized communities come about by virtue of the fact, it's a bit ironic, that they've been through some cataclysmic events that they couldn't control, and they've come out the other end and survived it. Right. And then from that event, they've realized, these are all the things that we did that actually made us strong and anti-fragile during that attack. And it wasn't through our choice that the attack happened, but it's come about. And now here we are on the other side, and we're a fully formed community. We may not all agree on everything, but we know the reasons why we're here. And it's almost always a freak event. Very, very interesting phenomenon, because that's the thing. Like, it's like, you've got to do the Petri dish model, let the thing grow, let it be decentralized, and once it is, then you got to attack it. You got to hit it with a meteor, and then if it comes out the other side, now we've got proof that it's actually decentralized. And coming back to the DAO, I like to focus on solutions, and I think it's very hard to solve the Hive DAO situation. I think it's generally a positive force on Hive. I also think it results in a lot of selling of Hive by the projects, and if they don't produce the value that they're selling, then they end up becoming a negative on the system. So we have to be cautious of that. But something that could happen is, for example, you could factor down the top whales' votes so that their vote is less strong per Hive power than a smaller whale. Of course, that's going to result in people fractionizing their accounts more and spreading them across, but at least that makes it harder. So you're never going to truly prevent this situation from happening again, but you should make it really difficult. You should make it as difficult as possible. And I'm sure also Block Trades feels that way, where he didn't really want to feel like he had to defund every project, but it was his only choice. And I'm sure, if you spoke to him, I haven't spoken to him about this, but I'm sure he would agree that he'd prefer to have a sliding scale now, so he didn't have to do that action. So having a sliding scale on the voting, so you don't have to do a full vote, having a depreciating vote the bigger your account gets. And I also think down votes, I think you should be able to downvote proposals as well. Maybe there's a certain weighting to that.
You can and then in the Dash DAO, by the way.
You can in the Dash DAO.
There's three voting options, which are yes, no, or abstain. Abstain kind of does nothing other than show that you're present and participating, but are unsure. Sometimes some people say, hey, if you want this, vote yes. If you want that, vote no. If you want this, vote abstain. So it's just like a three-poll option, sort of.
And I think the Hive DAO is like it is because it's come about in a revolution, right? It was added to the Hive community after the revolution happened. It was when it forked away from Steam, and so it was kind of put together quite quickly, and it works fairly well for most things. But it's got more development to go. It's got to grow over time and put more mechanisms in place. I think a sliding scale on the downvotes is really interesting as well. So you can downvote a certain amount, you can upvote a certain amount. And I think
and how
that's
that
not,
works,
it's
how that tends to
yeah,
work in the Dash corollary is if you have a whale who has more than one master node, then they can vote with some one way and some the other way.
yeah. So they can even out their
Yeah,
votes based on
they
the
can.
staking issue count.
Yeah,
I mean,
again, that was not
you can,
planned, but it just falls that way, you know?
I mean, this. I think one of the things that, and I don't know this for sure. I don't want to speak for block trades again, but to put myself in his position, I think if he had more accounts that were more fractured out, and then he was able to vote using those, it would be the equivalent of having a sliding scale. But I think with the situation that was happening at the time and the rate at which the proposal that he saw was a threat, and I don't want to speak for him. I'm not speaking for him. This is just my theory. That he probably looked at his witness votes and he looked at different things in the way he was voting on chain. He was like, "Shit, I've got to just take this drastic action." Whereas maybe there's a thing for the future where a few of the whales can portion out their votes a bit more distributed, so they have the option to vote with some accounts and not with others. So it's not such a drastic thing. But then at the same time, you can't stop people proxying to you.
Of
So
course.
people can a lot of people proxy to block trades because they trust his judgment. A lot of people proxy to Dan because they trust his judgment. I proxy to Dan. It makes my life a lot easier. Apart
Yeah,
from
and that's
times
another
like this.
feature in the Dash ecosystem. You have a few different keys for the master. There's like the collateral key, the operator key, which is like to actually run the node itself, and then there's a voting key, and you can delegate a voting key. And I know some people who just like, look, I'm just the investor. I just run this stuff. I don't keep track of stuff. Here's my voting key. Why don't you just vote on behalf?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it's kind of interesting how that shakes out. The funny thing, though, is I almost feel like all this stuff, and and some of this could be out of ignorance, but like for the purpose of the podcast, I don't want to know during the show even. But like a lot of this stuff could have been done off chain, meaning a lot of times like a nuclear bomb of last resorts seems like it should never come out of nowhere. It should like it's almost, I'm wondering if verbal guidance from some of the whales and stakeholders and stuff can kind of like shuffle the situation around in a way where it doesn't materialize on chain into something where a cataclysmic thing has to happen again. And this might have actually happened. It might have happened. I'm just ignorant of it, but it's just kind of interesting.
I fully agree, and I would argue, and we're all at fault here for this. You know, no one's perfect, but I would argue that maybe, but then there's two sides to this. So it's like, let the major stakeholders have a public call on a more regular basis. There's a core team call, right? That they do the core team dev, but maybe there needs to be a stakeholder call or more of a town hall thing. There is a town hall thing on Hive, but sometimes the whales don't attend. But the idea would be that there should be a place where people can voice their concerns and call and talk to each other, and you can get a better judgment of sentiment that's happening within the DAO before a major event happens, and then you can vote accordingly. So far, Hive hasn't really done a coordinated DAO call, and they have a Slack equivalent that people discussing. But then the question is, well, what happens if someone's traveling? What happens if someone's busy during that time? They need a few days off, and they're doing something in their personal lives, and they just can't react in time. Maybe a phone call. I don't know.
You know, it's just more conversations about what people are thinking about. You know.
Yeah, I mean, but ultimately, even that can't. It's not going to solve, because if someone's not available, you do still have a little crack that you can the drastic situation can squeeze its way through.
The interesting, so a couple other interesting things about dynamics, about like vote thresholds, for example. So if 98% of the stake doesn't vote, then 2% are deciding for everyone.
Yeah,
and it doesn't mean that that's necessarily a bad thing. Not necessarily. It's not necessarily a good thing either, though. It just is.
Yeah.
And for example, the Dash vote threshold is 10%, a net 10%. So it's, what would you say? That would be somewhere like 300 or so, 300 plus yes votes and no votes. And a lot of people don't vote because they just don't need to. Some people watch every proposal like a hawk and don't vote, and they don't vote until they need to, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And some other ones vote all the time, some vote inconsistently. And it's kind of interesting where you see voter participation levels change. So, for example, the December voting cycle is like the worst because it wraps up somewhere around Christmas. And it just,
Right.
there's a lot of people who are just who are busy at that time. And the trolls, like, because there's always a couple of them, they don't have like families or anyone who loves them in the world, and so they're very active during that time.
Except for Dash.
Yeah, well, I mean, that doesn't love them back because they never get what they want, except maybe during December. This is my time to shine. And so there's those dynamics. There's also an interesting dynamic where this is expressed in the proof of work hash rate war between Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin SV, but the same thing is present in DAO governance as well, which is the potential governance thing. Whereas the hash rate of Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin SV spiked during that time because they were competing to like kick out the chain, because normally only people who can make money mine.
Yeah.
But now they're like, everyone turns on their miners.
Yes,
and we get this.
That's exactly what happened in the Steam Hive takeover. Exactly the same thing. Everyone came out of the woodwork from the middle of nowhere and just started powering up, and the voter participation went through the roof for the witnesses so that we could try and get the chain back to neutral. And this, if you have 30% of the state voting in a parameter coin voting system or a DPoS system, then you are at risk. You're at risk of takeover, right? So you need to get that voting up to 40%, 45%, so that it's very unlikely that someone can come in. And then the problem with that, though, is if you get up to 40% on the main witness pool, then the DAO is going to be probably half of that. And that's what we've seen over time. It's like the DAO is like half of that. So then the whales that are big on the chain their effect is much bigger in the DAO than it is in the main witness pool. But then that brings back the argument to, well, maybe we should tear off some of the as you get past a certain amount of hive power, it decreases the amount of the weight of your vote per hive power.
Yeah. There's another, I guess, sort of final, because we've been rambling for a very long time here. There's a sort of a final point on the DAO stuff, which is kind of interesting, which is, what does the DAO do? Because the DAO, I think that one thing that's very dangerous is when you consider the DAO to be everything. It becomes like when the government controls every aspect of human life, then all of a sudden everyone's fighting over who's in power. And so, for example, the Dash DAO does two things, kind of. One is it distributes the money that comes in, which is not all the money in the Dash ecosystem, obviously, because people have businesses, they can buy stuff, they can self-fund, they can donation fund, they can do all kinds of stuff outside of that. But so that the Dash DAO distributes funds, that's 90% of what they do, I guess. And also it makes symbolic governance votes, which in the case of something like the Dash Investment Foundation does have legal binding, but for everything else, it's just the DAO saying we like this or not. But so if the Dash DAO today, someone put in a proposal that says, stop this Desert Lynx character from his shitty podcast, I would just be like, I'm not stopping shit. Like, I'm not doing anything. Like, sorry, I don't care if you unanimously voted. You think you are? I don't care. And like, they could also say, we're going to not pay you anymore. In which case, that is real. I do have to find a different job or different income. But the same things that I'm doing, I don't have to stop doing because there's no ownership. It's just that. And I'm sure like the Hive DAO is similar in terms of it's mostly a funding mechanism. But the thing that makes things a little different with Hive is the downvote ability for posts and things, where now you can push people's posts down and you can take money away from them, or you can give money to people. It's a little bit more, the voting element of it is a little bit more important. Whereas if everyone hates me in Dash, I send a transaction and pay that tiny fee, it works. And people could just completely ignore it. Whereas you have like the up and down voting stuff of content, like that's the thing that, as I'm sure, like if people, whatever project wants to be funded by the Hive DAO or doesn't want to be funded, like if you don't get the money you want, that's fine. Find money elsewhere. It's fine. Just make sure you don't piss people off enough to where, like, imagine if block trades started voting down people's comments and posts and stuff. That would be that would be a governance crisis at that point. That would be like, oh no, what are we going to do now?
If it didn't have the sliding scale, right?
Yes.
But on the downvotes, you do have the sliding scale. So you can just do a small downvote. So really, the downvote is for reward disputes. So if you feel like a piece of content has too many rewards because it's just a picture of someone's flower pot and then it's got $100 on it, whereas that $100 could be sent to a developer who's actually developing stuff on Hive, then you can downvote that to remove the rewards. That's the majority of downvotes on Hive. Some people abuse it, and I think that's not going to play out for them very well on layer 2 token drops in the future, because those people that are known abusers of downvotes probably won't get any layer 2 drops, just to exclude them from doing the same practice on the layer 2s. But yeah, I mean, that's why I know that we could do it on the DAO. You could have the sliding scale on the DAO because we have it already on the downvotes on the content side.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. There's a user. I'm gonna tag them here. Oi Caramba is their handle on.
But by the way,
Yes.
something that's really cool. The African man's come from Dash, and there's an account here. I mentioned him before. Let me just get his name up again. The Sly. Is it?
Yeah.
Some call me Sly. He's also said that he's from Dash as well. So it's nice to see these Dash users coming across and experimenting.
Yes, of course. And as I mentioned, I don't think I know the African man. I do know. I'm pretty sure I know who Sly is. I think it's a friend of mine from many years past who's in a lot of different crypto projects. But I've kind of known him from he's been on this podcast. He's been one of the guests before. But yeah, it's good to see. And I didn't actively recruit him either. I think he just saw me posting about stuff, and he's like, "Oh, this is cool. I'm going to come over." So
Get the experience.
I'm going to say in the live chat, shout out to Oi Caramba for his perseverance. There's a fellow, Oi Caramba is what he goes by here. I won't dox his Dash Discord handle in case he doesn't want to, but he's a longtime Dash user who jumped on as one of the more active Inleo people. He's a photographer, a professional photographer, and he mostly does female models. That's kind of what he photographs. And he had a lot of bumps in the early days of trying to get on Hive because a lot of people instantly like downvoted him to 0, hit him with spam things because they thought it was a bot or something, putting like not safe for work spam or something. Because like there's some provocative like photo shoots and some that aren't and stuff.
Yeah.
And so navigating that, talking to Hive watchers and be like, no, this guy, this is him. He's literally posts his Instagram stuff here. He just wants to do this too. And like, getting all those blocks taken care of so you can like freely post and stuff.
And there's a lot of criticisms. There's a lot of criticisms as to how heavy-handed Hive watchers are. You know, I'm one of the biggest critics, but I don't come out with it publicly because I want to provide a solution before I really publicly criticize it, and I haven't got resources to do that at the moment. But so I like the work that Hive watchers do overall. They're a good force on the chain, but they are quite heavy-handed with some people, and they've driven some people off the chain that they shouldn't have driven off ultimately. But then at the same time, you know, there's a whole philosophical debate behind this, behind like, well, why do you come to Hive? Because you can earn rewards for blogging. Well, maybe that's the wrong reason that we shouldn't be selling it that way. People shouldn't be expecting votes from people, and then when they don't get votes, they leave because they didn't get any votes. So, well, you're not getting any votes on Facebook or Twitter.
You're getting money for it at least, really yeah. I mean, I am for X,
well,
whatever.
It translates, votes to money ultimately on these chains.
Yeah.
But so there's that side, and then at the same time, that when you come into the community, if you just come in, post loads, and then you're hoping to make rewards, but you haven't interacted with the community. This is the difference. When the community owns the protocol, it's not like Facebook, where Facebook's company owns the protocol, and you come and post there, and they mine your data and make money off you, right, without you really knowing. Well, this is different. You are now part of a community, and they own the protocol. So if you're seen to be coming in and not interacting with the community and just trying to take rewards off, then some people could have a problem with that. I mean, it's fairly obvious. So, but it's not obvious coming from the traditional Web 2 world, where the community isn't the owner of the platform. So you have to create at least the impression that you're coming in to talk to the community and to interact with people, and then they start voting for you because they like the interactions they've had with you. It's like going into any other tribe or any other village, right? You can't just go in and start extracting the resources of that village. You have to go and add
Yeah.
something to the village, and then slowly but surely get accepted, and then you start receiving the votes. And
Yeah, and I think that that's one thing that's very, I guess, unique about. Oh, very. I don't know if I'd say that because I don't have a big picture of all the crypto today, but Hive is an extremely social thing, and I think that one of the downsides of that is that it might tend towards cliquishness, where people end up more, everyone, you got to know everyone, got to know the right people type thing. But on the positive side, it's just you got a very strong bonded community that, whereas like the random, let's just say random Litecoin user doesn't know the next Litecoin user because they just use the chain. They just come and go. That's it. Psh, just send
sure.
it. Whereas with Hive, you're bumping into all these other people, and then you're
It's the social aspect of it.
yeah, it's a
Social
different,
aspect.
and that's the thing. It's a different animal, and like for a primarily monetary network like something like Dash, you use it, and that's it. And
Sure.
you pay your little fee, and you use it, and that's it. And if you want to get involved with the DAO, you can. If you want to get involved with community people, you can. But there's a large percentage of Dash users I found out, and it's probably larger than most other cryptos, which in this case it might be a little unfortunate, that are just quiet. Like no one knows. They're just living their life. No one knows
Passive
who they
investors.
are.
Yeah.
They own some. They look at it once in a while, or they are a daily user as far as for monetary purposes, but they don't poke around. They don't do any of this
Yeah.
stuff. Whereas, and so the person who's super or purposely buys all kinds of weird illicit things using it, or the person who's like super well connected and like a community champion, the chain is completely agnostic to those two users. It's the same. Whereas Hive is a living organism. The Hive is a living organism. It's much more interconnected to where those two users will be vastly different experiences, probably in the Hive ecosystem because of the way it's done.
Well, if you're using Hive as just a transaction layer, it's neutral to everybody. But if you're using it, if you're trying to get hold of some of the rewards from the mining pool, you're now a miner, but you're a social miner, right? Some of the mining rewards go to actual people that are securing the chain, like traditional mining, but most of the rewards go to people who are being social on the chain. And so there is a social element to it. Although having said that, this is just the social media side of Hive, right? With something like Distriator, where we're paying discounts to people for spending the currency in real businesses, that's different because what it is, it's a group of whales that are saying, we are guaranteeing you a vote if you spend the currency, right? And you can't really socially argue with people using the currency because that's good for the ecosystem. So it's very unlikely you're going to get disputes about that as long as people aren't exploiting. And of course, there's people trying to exploit that mechanism, but there's ways to make that really difficult. And so it's a constant battle. But that's started to develop on Hive, where it's like, do this action, get a reward, right? Get a guaranteed whale vote because you did this action. And then that data can be used to further monetize later. And that those rewards can be returned to the user for that. So Hive has always been initially the Trojan horse distribution was through social media, but as time goes on, it's now moving towards this: do a set of actions that are valuable and get a reward as a result instead. And that reward's hard to argue with in terms of DAO voting, because if you're using the ecosystem, if you're using the token to do things, to spend, then how could you argue with that? That's adding value to the ecosystem. So that's where this is starting to move. And I think there's been some realizations on Hive recently where there's going to be a portion of Hive that's pure social, a portion of it that's purely rewarding activities. Like, for example, we're talking to a group at the moment that do festivals and concerts. They do holograms. So they want people to go and interact with the augmented reality and the holograms. And if they do the interaction, they get a reward from Hive, and then they can spend that at the local shops inside the concert. So there's this type of like rewarding actions that's going to come about in the near future that I'm very, very excited about.
And that's one thing, because I've always been thinking about social media sites and things like that and all those kind of use cases, and the built-in rewards mechanism from the Hive creator reward thing is something that's hard. It's difficult to replicate in other systems other different systems. Like you have to set it up more manually. You have to find a pool of funding. You have to have it's the fact that it's built in is like one of those things that just makes it ready to go, to where you just use and do well. Just jump in and start using,
Yeah.
and you're there. And so that's, as I mentioned when I was talking about the possibility of doing like a Dash Hive partnership way back, I was kind of seeing those like, you know, this does this well, this does this well, and there's almost no overlap. There's a very tiny overlap. And so by using, if the user who uses both gets all the benefits kind of thing.
Sure, sure. Yeah, this is what I like about this, and this is where I'm like, maximalism is a bad thing because we can really, if you let's just assume Bitcoin is the dream. Like when we knew about Bitcoin in 2013 and 2012, right? It was like, oh, this is where it's going. We're going to be free. It can't do that now because of the way that the hash rules have ended up and the way it's ossifying. So the result is, can we use other protocols to mesh with Bitcoin or mesh with the original Bitcoin white paper ideology and really create that without having to only use Bitcoin? And I think the answer is absolutely yes, we can do this. And we can do this in a fair, free way that's not scammy. And people can get true digital freedom in their lives by interacting with these protocols. I just want to say one other thing here, regards to the downvoting side of things. We are building platforms that will allow Dash to have its own social media platform. And you will be able to run the servers yourself. You'll be able to run the URL yourself. We won't be able to touch it. It'll be built for you. And then your users can come on and interact and earn Hive. But we will also do a snapshot. Maybe you can help us with this. Do a snapshot of the Dash blockchain. And then we'll drop a layer 2 social token to the Dash community so that they can have their own social token and upvote and downvote each other based on their social contributions to Dash on the Dash platform, right? And then you can also have a cash out to Dash system there. This is not far away. We are moving towards this. It's all open source, and then coming back to the downvoting, well, maybe there's certain people that you've seen downvoting that you don't really appreciate the downvotes that they're doing because they're clearly abusing it. Well, maybe they aren't included in the Dash token drop, right? And then you have a foundational base that you can distribute Dash tokens from without the sketchy downvoters being involved. And that's where you can really try and lay a foundation to distribute more social rewards to Dash users. And then maybe in the future that can be used to either buy Dash, buy the layer 1, or to help with governance or something. Maybe there's a separate governance layer there as well. Who knows? So I think that's, we're going to do this for many, many different communities. And I think it's really a proof of the fact that Hive can be a base social layer for not just for Hive, but for all of the other major chains. And we can give them their communities real voices on decentralized technology that can't be censored. Like you see all these people using like centralized Web2 forums to discuss their crypto decisions, their governance decisions. And it's just ironic, it shouldn't be happening in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, governance by Discord is a meme these days. And
Right.
it is funny enough how Discord is where a lot of governance discussions do take place, even though there is a DAO at the end of the day, an actual on-chain DAO. But I think that every crypto should start finding what are the right tools to put all their community on chain, bring their community on chain as well, and. Right. It's one of those things where, like, for example, I think there's some discussions from the Dash community to put the Dash website on the Evolution platform, actually store it on the own network, interact with it, and do things like that. Social media forums are something people haven't talked about yet, but who knows? But what I'd hope is for chains that don't have any good way of doing this technically, for those communities, that they should explore using other chains for this. And just find a good cross, like, for example, the Litecoiners should have a Hive ecosystem for sure. Put all their social stuff on that, because that's not something that Litecoin does. It just doesn't. But so rather than doing it on Web 2 rails, why not do it on like a friendly buddy over there? And I know that I'm pretty sure the Litecoin community might be an easy candidate to get on board with this kind of stuff, for example. One thing I really like is the kind of glue for a lot of this stuff is Leodex, which is very interesting because it's an aggregation DEX that can let Hive go back and forth between tons of different coins. Obviously, the Dash cash outs are like the first example of that, but it can be so many different kinds of chains. And I think that it's almost like Inleo is for me was one of the more interesting projects on all of Hive. But for me, it's almost like just gets more attention, but the real star could be Leodex, because all you have to do is put a little Leodex plugin into any Hive anything, and people can just go in and out from whatever token they want and just all of a sudden have access to that. So imagine you could just Splitterlands players, why can't they just cash out to Litecoin or whatever? Why can't any Ecency user, like, they want to boost their account, they want to power it up, they just throw in some Dogecoin and then it turns into Hive power, and then they're doing that, and vice versa. And just once you have that little glue layer, then that's the one thing, is when you have a lot of people in communities who are like, this is my community, this is my token, this is all I got, and you say use another chain, and then now I have to become a holder and a active user of another project. Now I have to balance two things in my brain. I don't want to do that. But when you just give them the opportunity to just not have to think about it, just use the tech, and it's fluid. Now all of a sudden, like the tribal maximalist little spear holding, things just starts to like fade away, and then people start, coexisting a lot more.
I think that's where we're going. I think we're going to a cross-chain future. I think one of the cool things here that this tech can harness is the tribal nature. I think it's great. The tribalisms, we say it's bad while our chains are isolated, but once they can cross-chain and you can start using each other's technology for the strengths of it with your own crypto. Like, look at VSC. In the very near future, you're going to be able to have a MetaMask wallet and move Dash with your MetaMask wallet, right? So you won't even need to have a Dash wallet to move Dash, right? And this is where we're going. And the same with Dash. You're going to be able to have a Dash wallet and move Bitcoin on-chain Bitcoin, So no, not on-chain. It'll be a wrap version of Bitcoin. You'll be able to move it.
I hope it's not on-chain Bitcoin. I can't afford
that. Right. Yeah, it'll be zero fees to move it, and you'll be able to move all these currencies with zero fees. So it's very interesting where we're going, and that's the point here. It's like, and then once you harness all that tribal energy and start making the most of all of their strengths and giving everyone access to all the same tools, it's going to make the whole freaking industry, I think, align in a much more clear direction without having all of this infighting that's going on. That's where we're going. That's where I see it moving to.
Yeah.
I'd like if you wouldn't mind, Joel, I've just posted a link to the Telegram.
Yeah.
It'd be great if you could play this video, if you don't mind.
Yes. So
it's only about a minute long, but it gives you an idea of what this is.
Quick question on that. Is there any copyright strike risk at all when doing it?
No, absolutely not. It's all our technology. It's all open source, and it's all on GitHub.
Yes, because unfortunately, because I am on YouTube, I did at one point play some random person at ZCon, the Zcash conference, did some Zcash song on a piano, and I used that as like an exit tune, and it got demonetized.
Oh man!
So
really, there's no music on it. There's no,
and it wasn't even the person doing it; just an automated thing. But yeah, I'll take the risk for the team. Here we go.
So what this is where you basically you move some Bitcoin into a wallet, a small amount, and then you sign a transaction on the Bitcoin blockchain, and then that information should I
have sound on this or not? Does it matter?
No, there's no need for sound.
Okay, no. That's different then. Let me just put this on the screen.
So this is so you sign a transaction on the Bitcoin blockchain, and then at the same time it uses that signature data and inputs it into the Hive account header on the Hive blockchain. So it's proof that Hive account is that Bitcoin account, and then you can post with that Hive account and earn Hive rewards. But it's a Bitcoin account. It's got the Bitcoin balance on the Hive front end, so you can see the Bitcoin balance there. And then when you post, some of the rewards go to your Lightning wallet instantly.
Interesting.
So it's like it's powerful stuff, and I think that helps spread Hive, and that user will get a little bit of Hive power, but they'll also be able to earn their native blockchain currency. And I'm thinking something similar for many of the other. There's no reason we can't do something similar for many of the other. We're just obviously going through the bug fixing phase right now. But
yes.
So I don't know if you can see that happening.
I can see the phone on the screen now, and I have to interject that it does break my heart to see well out of Satoshi, but for obvious reasons. But I understand that you got to do what you got to do for this.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, it's to prove that this technology helps Bitcoin become better, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
So now you can turn normal Bitcoiners into Bitcoin miners, where they're just posting photos and mining Bitcoin. Well, it's not layer one mining, but at least they've got a way to earn Bitcoin autonomously.
Yeah, and I have to
and the
say,
same should be said for other communities as well.
The idea of it as a mining, like social mining or whatever, it is kind of an interesting corollary, because I remember in the early days, everyone got involved with crypto, and the only way to everything was proof of work. So everyone wanted to mine, and there's mine. You got all these people. How do I mine it? How do I mine it? And they just people getting involved, getting excited to get involved. Mining was a great, when it was, individualized. It was a great way of getting a community energized. And then staking is still that, but the thing is, staking is a lot more. There's more commitment involved, and it's more passive in terms of like you buy the token, you do the staking thing, and then you just sit on it. Whereas mining is much more active, and so obviously transacting is great if that's what you're doing, but there is something to be said for social mining, and that's one of the things is like Hive is allowing Dash to have social mining again to a certain extent, where now you have people posting, interacting, whatever, and then they're engaging in mining. And it's just an interesting extra dynamic. And
as long as that situation doesn't become exploitative, where there's a constant selling pressure on Hive, like I think what people in Hive want to see is that Dash users are earning Hive power, which should be the default. It should be part of the rewards, and then they'll take some of the HBD and be able to sell that, and hopefully keep some of the HBD. And that way, both sides are winning. There's not an extractive situation happening. I think it's great.
Well, that's the thing is, it's a good thing that there's a DAO, because a DAO can make these changes if necessary. I am going to write some article, might be thought provoking, because I think it's going to be like very largely positive, but like also with some like open-ended questions about how the Hive tokenomic system works, and the balance and the incentives and like what happens. And there might, like, the system works if when used as intended, it works, which sounds kind of like a ridiculous statement, but there's more nuance to it, where sometimes if people are following their own self-interest and that hurts the system, it's kind of the system's fault for not being designed correctly. And so we're almost 3 hours in. This is another 3 hours. I do have to end it. So I have to cut.
So I've got a million things to show you, but we can't.
Yes, I'll have to cut off. I'll have to cut off there. But just the teaser part is, I think that like Bitcoin might have been hijacked, but it was always going to be hijacked because of the natural economic incentives in the system. And it's just like every system that has a malady, I lean to what doesn't mean it's not a bad system, but any system that's had something, just like Bitcoin Cash has been through a series of chain splits. And why it's not, well, you can point to things that happened, but I'm always going to lean towards saying, what were the conditions that made this possible or probable? And that's kind of where we're going. Is there a whale problem in that's XYZ chain? I mean, it's just because someone happened to, but also maybe the conditions, maybe this is a naturally occurring condition based on the conditions set by the tokenomic system. So teaser for an article next week. Let's just say that, because otherwise it's going to be, people are watching at home just like nodding off at this point.
If you want to pass that through me, I wouldn't take any rights to say I've got to change the content of the article, but to read it technically, to just check to make sure that you've got the right understanding. Yes,
that will help, because I do think Hive is a much more complicated tokenomic system than most blockchains, as far as like the ins and the outs and who gets this, where's the staking rewards come from for that, or if you stake the HBD, what happens to that, and who balances. Like, there's all these little things that I could easily get facts wrong. So I'll absolutely send you over.
More than happy to take a look, for sure.
Yes.
Because the last thing I'd want is for you to publish something and then some of the people on Hive say, "Oh, you got that wrong," and so therefore the fundamental assumptions in the whole article are wrong. But definitely
Yeah.
happy to see if I can check that,
Yeah.
because I think
It's
it'd be very useful. I welcome, to me, like a guy like you who's been around the industry for so long, like you got to welcome that open criticism or constructive criticism, and if we can get it to be as good as possible, then yeah, good.
Yeah, for sure. It's, as you mentioned, it's kind of the online equivalent. One of my favorite things to do is when I'm in an argument with someone who I don't want to argue with anymore because they're not making sense and I'm just not interested anymore. Sometimes my out is just I just stop answering them and just let it die there. But my favorite exit is when they make a grammatical mistake and I can correct it as my final point, like viewer, and then I just stop talking, and then that's it. It's over.
I've got to be careful. I've got to be careful arguing with you online then, because my grammar's terrible.
Yeah. So basically, so people don't do that to me. I'll have you on the facts about like actually it's not 5%, it's 7%, and then done.
Right, done.
Yeah, I'll help that.
Whereas I would argue that your criticism of these types of systems is a very important set of experience that people should listen to. So maybe there's some improvements to come from it.
And it's like a internal friendly comment anyway, right?
Sure,
because it's not an external.
It's not malicious.
Yeah, it's not, or it's not careless either. It's like when a friend says, "Hey, you get a little chunky there." Oh, God damn it. Okay. It makes more sense to be taken seriously in that case. So anyway, let's wrap this thing up. People follow you at Starkerz on Hive, any Hive interface, including Inleo, and at 3Speak TV on X. Have you thought of getting your personal account, or are you just going to keep on speaking for 3?
I don't know. Like I always thought I'd be like a non-crypto person, but just as time's gone on, the social side of Hive pulls you in, and I'm out around the world showing people how they can spend money in businesses and get 20% discounts, and it's hard to keep it all on. So maybe I will at some point, but for now I like having the 3Speak handle, and then there's various other projects that I work on as well. I actually my account doesn't post that much to Hive, but I post a lot to Hive because of all the other accounts that we're running, the projects that we're running. So it keeps me busy. I'm not particularly infatuated with building my own personal profile, but just spreading the technology.
Well, let me just tell you, I just found out that on X the account Real Block Trades is open. So you can just jump on that. The account Block Trades is suspended anyway. I don't know who that actually was. If that was him or that was someone else. But you could be Real Block Trades and just have a picture.
Just
and
start spewing stuff.
Have his profile picture because you know what he looks. I'm sure you have a photo of him somewhere. Just put that up there and then just be commenting random things. And people are like, that guy said this. And he's just like, it wasn't even me.
Oh, man. Well, that's why you got to go to Hive, because you can see the reputations, you can see the real accounts on Hive based on the activity on the blockchain. You can't argue with that. There's no way to game it. So, and by the way, that's another important thing for forks. If you've got a bunch of reputed accounts that have built reputation on the blockchain over years, and they're all saying we're over here on the new fork, that's the real fork. Whereas on a lot of other blockchains, it's very hard to tell what the fork is if you're being attacked.
Yeah. That's for sure. Well, so as we wrap this up, I will say that Bybit was hacked for 1.3 billion ETH. So it's going to be a fun weekend. So have some fun with that. Maybe we'll see another ETH rollback.
Maybe the Real Block Trades will comment on that over the weekend.
The Real Block Trades, yes. Or you might, it'd be funny if you go to try to register that account and it's already registered, because I was like, nah, fuck it, I'll do it.
Yes. I'm sure that many people your reach is that influential, Joel, and that you've got 3 seconds after you mention something that the account's gone.
Yeah, for sure. I'm sure people have done stuff like that. But anyway, thanks everyone for watching. Don't forget the taxation is theft and that Starkerz is the man. Any guest requests that you want, I'm going to keep it rotating with the people I like the most, but throw that in there. I'll see you guys next week. And try out Inleo, especially if you're trying to, experience the Hive thing for the first time in an X-like way. You're trying to, get paid out and whatever automatically that's not Hive. But that's like the tip of the iceberg. One thing I will be starting to do is I can't. I haven't decided if I'm going to pay someone to do this for me or if I'm going to do it myself. But do a little exploration on how to get in, like how to get in and out of the Hive ecosystem. For example, if you register with a key store file, how do you get your actual Hive keys from that and plug that into keychain to go use in other Hive ecosystems? Or what if you are an existing Hive user? How do you hook it up to, work with Leo decks and other things like that? Basically, or if you have a key store file but you forgot your recovery password, a recovery phrase, how do you get that out of that? Like all these little tips and tricks to get everyone connected in, because I know a few Dash people who have been asking me because they're like, now that I'm in the Hive ecosystem as a Dash in Leo user, how do I use other Hive things that don't necessarily support this key store login? And I'm like, I like, how do I actually get my Hive keys out of this whole thing? Like just my Hive keys. And so I'll have some tips and tricks for that, so you can go in the great, glorious playground that is everything. So, yeah, everyone, thanks for watching. Thanks again, Starkerz, for being here. Bye-bye. Have a good weekend.
Always a pleasure.
And, yeah, don't hate. Bye-bye.